Please rise for silent invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It didn't quite have the same flair as last night when we had the national anthem sung, but
little
all the same.
lacking tonight, but
And yes, I'm going to remember to ask you to call the roll tonight.
I was going to say,
Councilor Ford.
Yes,
Councilor
here.
Tremont.
Here.
Councilor Bastian.
here.
Vice Mayor Stiltner.
Here.
Mayor Burnett.
Here. We are here to discuss the fiscal year 2019 general fund expenditures in this workshop. I'm assuming, Jake, that we've got between the 1,000 questions we've asked of staff since the last time we met, that we've probably about 750 answers, and you guys have some sort of presentation to make?
Or something similar, yes, sir.
Okay.
Hit it, Trace.
Proceed.
Good evening. Tracy Ream, Finance Director. Since the last time we met to discuss the general fund budget, there's been a few changes made, some reductions as a result of council decisions. So I'm briefly going to go over them. So again, our agenda is to determine the final millage for the first public hearing. That's our goal this evening, and that public hearing again is going to be on Wednesday the 5th at 5:30 in the afternoon. Our max millage was set at 4.8157, and the revised millage is now at 4.7781, which is a reduction of 0.0376 mils from the max millage that has been set. So this is a look at Port Orange's historical millage over the past 10 years, and you can see that it has varied from a low a few years ago of 4.392, and the high was 4.95 back in 2011. Our 18 adopted millage was 4.4881, so the proposed millage is 0.29 above that, or a 6.46% change. That is not the rollback, that's just simply the change between the 19 and the 18 millage. The debt would go down from 0.3174, reduced by 0.251, and so overall the taxpayer would look at a change from 4.8055 to 5.0704, an increase of 0.2649. If we look at, we're different than the cities around us, but it's always useful to have a point of comparison. So if we look at the total taxes levied per capita, you can see that Port Orange is the third from the lowest at 256 with this proposed millage. If you look at it, comparing it, this is both operating and debt, but if you look at it on an actual millage basis, we would be fourth from the lowest.
Can you back 2 slides?
Certainly.
One more.
Yes. So you see the shores over there with a very high rate. That's of course because they have a low population base, but of course they have that beachfront. So when you look at them here, they go down to the 0.71.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the change in the types of revenue that are coming into the city to support the general fund. So you see that the one we're talking about primarily this evening is going to be that ad valorem rate, which currently at the 4.7781 would increase by 1.96 million.
Could you help me out a little?
Of course.
Millage is based upon assessments. Assessment changes can be abrupt from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
That's why most commonly when you're doing taxes and tax changes, we go on the fallback rate. So could you give me a percentage above for rollback?
I can, I'm gonna
Because,
switch.
That I now have a firm reference point, because rollback is basically the amount of revenue you raised last year. So how much your taxes go up comparatively is a function of how much you raised last year versus how much you're raising this year.
Okay, the spreadsheet that I've brought up that we will be, is a tool for us to use later, shows the increase in both the change from the current, the rollback, and including or not including debt. So just about every which way you'd want to slice it. So as a percent over rollback, it's in this blue here. So at the 4.7781, the percent over rollback is 13.54.
So the standard would be 13.54, and that's what we also report to the state when we're putting in our tax rate.
The DR 420 calculates that when you put in the rates.
So we're talking right now about a 13.54% increase proposed for this year.
Over rollback.
Over rollback, yes.
Yes, sir. Go back here. Okay. Oops.
And that's just taxable, the property tax, revenue.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yep.
Right.
There's other
So
revenues.
the other revenues are changing, but of course the property tax is the one over which council has control.
Yep.
The most direct control. So you see other taxes going up. Basically, all categories here are increasing with the exception of miscellaneous revenue. Another point of note is that in this proposed budget, we are not using equity, again, because at this point, we have not reached our minimum capital threshold for the working capital policy. So from the fiscal 18 budget to the proposed budget that we're talking about now, there are changes by department. I'm happy to answer those. I'm also happy to talk about the changes that brought us down to the 4.7781. Which would you, I mean, some of them I think are worthy of being highlighted. For instance,
Start there.
okay, for instance, one of the larger changes is that after we met on the all other funds budget, that had originally included renovations for fire stations 70, I gave you the one with the note on it, sir.
Sorry.
71 and 74?
Yeah, 72 and 75 are now going
sorry.
to be postponed. So remaining in that are 71 and 74.
Right.
And of course, and of course the kitchens, which were included in the CIP.
Yeah.
And
So to say postpone, by the way, I want to clarify, we're always going to do 2 this year, 2 next year. It was just,
We did 73
kind-
last year.
yep, and we kind of just,
We had them all funded.
we
and
had
so
them all this year. So we're not postponing something we planned. We had always planned to do 2 and 2.
Okay.
Okay. So that was a significant change. And then we also awarded the mowing contract. There was some savings associated with that since the bid came in lower than anticipated, so those savings have been brought in. You know, we took a look at the GIS technician and we looked at the models, and initially that was going to increase the general fund, but in fact it decreases it because of the way the models work. So we reported that savings. You know, we've moved we're looking at moving the payroll position from one to the other, so you'll see like interdepartment changes. But those are the larger of them. Those are the larger of the changes. So as we look here to the changes between the adopted budget last year and where we're sitting to start these discussions, we also have some significant changes. So in the non-departmental area, of course, we have, it's including the ADA transition plan in there. It's including a bit for market compression and some operating increases. In the GIS technician, funded with the general fund, we've got internal service funds, so flowing in. So that's the majority of those increases. In the mayor and council, this is building maintenance and dues. Here in the city manager, We actually are transferring the grants manager position. Was previously in 18, it was funded in the city manager, now it's in finance, so that results in that reduction. So I mean, I can go over some of those. They're all included in this book as well. So these, you know, you've been given a variety of schedules to aid your evaluation of the numbers. There's quite a lot of them. This big figure here with community development is of course primarily code, moving from community development to police. The numbers in the fire, of course, include, let me move over here. That's including a lot of what is going to be discussed this evening for additional firefighters and a transport unit. So that's the large increase there. The police, if we look at that, a lot of this increase here is code coming over, as well as some 3 officers and an evidence technician. So overall, you're looking at an increase of $2.5 million. This big reduction here in transfers out is detailed on, I think, page 28, 7 and 28. A lot of it is a reduction in what's going into the general capital fund. So given that we're not transferring a lot into that fund this year, again, because we're not using a lot of equity, that's primarily the reduction there. That's kind of what has been prepared. I'm happy to answer questions on what's changed since the last time we discussed. You want Alan to talk?
Yep.
You want to field questions first, or?
Well, yeah, we'll field questions on the increases from the general fund expense with the with the changes that we discussed, Mary.
Okay. Questions for Tracy before we move on?
Nothing,
None?
nothing
Okay.
this time.
Is everybody comfortable with the stuff in the budget book outside the a la carte items? Is there any items that need to be discussed?
I don't have
All right,
Okay.
let's go to the a la carte. Before we do, Alan's gonna give us a brief on update with some of the stuff regarding the ambulance that you had asked for. And in front of me, it looks like I have some numbers that Councilman Ford had said he would try to get for us as well, and I imagine he'll be speaking to those. Alan? Bob, did you want to go first?
Sure.
With your numbers?
Pleasure.
Yeah, Alan, sorry.
Over the past couple of months, we've had a lot of discussions about the response times of for fire and evac. Our response times for fire, when you look at it, this is between July of 17 and June of 18, are as we expected and we've always thought is excellent. Our fire response times have been very good, and I had no doubt they were. What is surprising, however, is that the Volusia EMS response times for their evac ambulances also are, I would call our response times excellent, their response times as good. They appear to match what I would call national standards. National standards being average response time of 9 minutes, although, you know, who knows what a national standard is or what it means. As you can see, we had 4,490 emergency responses. We had 1,480 non-emergency responses to Port Orange. These are just numbers for Port Orange. These are not countywide numbers. They're just Port Orange numbers. The maximums were usually in the 20 to 30 minutes. These are the outliers, as they call them. Averages being 7 minutes, generally 7 to 7.5 minutes. compared to fire's response times, which are 5 to 5.5 minutes. So you can see, on the average, our own fire department gets there quicker, and there's about a 2-minute average lag between the two. For those of you that are not aware, we have what's called a bifurcated system. We have both fire and evac ambulance responds to our health-related or accident-related calls. And so we have 2 people come, and then ambulance transports. I gave out some additional figures on what was going on in the system, and for example, the number of patients transported, total of 4,311. So got a fairly healthy transport business here in Port Orange by evac. So I pulled these numbers because I'm interested in taking a look at how severe the problem is. Based on these numbers, it would appear that our response times are not unreasonable, and they could be made even better with the addition of the ambulances that the county is now promising us. The other issue, I would say, after looking at these numbers and looking at some other statistics, a lot of how we do it is part of the problem we're having. We're transporting people we shouldn't be transporting. We really need a real serious look at the protocols of who gets transport, what is an emergency, what isn't. We need to take a look very seriously, and they are doing it already at the dispatch centers and at protocols to see if we can perhaps make more effective and rational decision-making on how to transport. Because some people are using evac and the ambulance system as a vehicle, a cab service to their doctor or to the medical service, and that's not appropriate. How to sort that out, I'll leave it for more intelligent people than I, but they should be working on it. We also have it a little more complex because who's causing the backups gets complex with the emergency rooms and hospitals, because they get in and get overloaded too. So it can get to be a little complex mire. But on the average, the response times are better than I thought, which I'm happy to report, because this kind of takes the pressure, at least for me, off decision making. I do think, and I've talked to the county managers, I've talked to the county representatives for our district, and they're in agreement that over the next couple of months, we need to start a complete look at the whole system and how we apportion our ambulances and how we do protocols. There needs to be a review, clearly, which I did talk to them and offered to participate in that review with them. We'll see what comes from that, but I am hopeful. But the main thing I'm talking about today is the report on response times is not bad. Now, do we have outliers in any system? Now, I know, having been police chief, no matter how hard you try, no matter how diligent you are, you'll get a situation where everything goes wrong and you won't have the public safety people available when you need them. It's a sad thing, but you can never get it perfect because of the laws of chance and probabilities. And, you know, when you're dispatching people, it's like you're always in a poker game. You never know when the cards are going to come up poorly or they're going to come up good. So that's the report I have on these.
And I don't know, maybe Chief can help, or maybe you were at
I'm
told.
like 60%, I should be good.
Do we know, one of the problems we had in trying to get this data with the response time is I could never really clearly understand methodology. I think it's methodology 3 if you look down there. Is the response time, do you know if the response time is from first call for evac to patient interaction, or is it from the vehicle that got called finally gets to them, you know what I mean? Because sometimes they get diverted and they have to call another one. Is that response time is,
was unable to get an
Yeah.
answer to that, but they did tell me that that was not, that it did occur from time to time. It should not sway the numbers that
some,
much.
all right,
Bob, looking at those numbers, just the sheet you gave me, with I just want to, looking at Volusia EMS, the emergency transports versus non-emergency,
yeah.
4490 versus 1488, so 75% of our calls as they initially come in are considered of an emergency nature. Is that, so I'm reading that correct?
That is not unusual because everything's an emergency at first. It's usually, and that's true of all the public safety type of calls. And then over time, as people get there and see what's going on, there's a general winning out of the emergency nature. But yes,
Okay.
this is what they're dispatched as. Do they always end up as emergencies? No.
Comments, questions? Go ahead, Drew.
I would tend to disagree. I did this for a very long time, and they don't all start off as emergent. They might all start off as a 911 call, but
Yeah.
they're not all emergencies. You'll be dispatched to perhaps a slip and fall or a broken bone. Not emergency, but you need to get there.
Right.
It's not an ALS call. And then looking at the response times, average response time for Port Orange over 4,760 some odd incidences, 5.5 minutes, 5:31.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at Volusia counties, 7:32, and these are emergency incidents. That's over 25% slower.
2 minutes slower.
Yeah, it's over 25% slower.
Yep.
As you go up to the 90th percentile, we're there, and it looks like 7:52. EVAC is 12:33. That's over 60% slower response time. And as you get up into the 95th percentile, it's in excess of 70% slower. So I would tend to say that that's unacceptable.
These are considered nationally pretty good statistics compared to most areas of the country.
Well, I'd still say that, I mean, if they were right on our heels, you could say it's respectable. I'd say 2 minutes on the seconds count, and we're talking about 2+ minutes.
Yeah, but here's what Springer said, that the purpose is get a technician, medical person to them and stabilize the patient. His concern, and that's where Port Orange numbers are the most important, in that they get the patient stabilized. Now, what happens when the fire department, especially in the outliers here, arrives, when EVAC arrives later, it does tie up the ambulance, for the firefighters for a while they're waiting for the person to be transported. So the problem isn't as much, in most cases, there's a wide range of responses due to medical situations vary. On the average, the problem is with the outliers from EVAC is that they're tying up our firefighters, our medical people, while they're waiting for an ambulance, for the outliers. On the average, the system works okay, but the outliers are problematic, yes.
Yeah, the outliers are kind of severe. 90th percentile of just the emergency calls are 12 minutes, which means 10% of the time, emergency and ambulance takes 12.5 minutes to get there.
Yep.
That 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but of 4,490 calls, that's 449 calls, emergency calls, where it took 12.5 minutes to get an ambulance to. So, I mean, I agree with that part of the analysis, Bob. The outliers are concerning.
Bob, if you can speak to this, maybe, I don't know if you know this, because this was really, I think this is really critical for the discussion to better understand, is there seems to be two different definitions of a response time.
Mm-hmm.
In Bob and I's background, a response time is from the time the 911 call answers it to that first police officer showing up on the scene.
These are,
And what happens in this scenario, and and they've even got a note down here, is they don't start the response time until the ambulance is actually dispatched and en route.
Right.
Well, if it takes 20 minutes to get an ambulance dispatched, even if they show up in 7, in my mind, it took 27 minutes to get the ambulance there, not 7 minutes. And that's,
Yep.
and then like they've got noted here in their methodology in item 3 here, incidents in which units are canceled during response are not part of the computation. Well, that's one of the ongoing problems we keep hearing about is ambulance 1 is on its way, they're 4 minutes into the response, they get canceled, rediverted over to somewhere else, and now you wait. And 4 or 5 minutes go by, another ambulance gets dispatched.
They
And
restart
then they
the
get
clock when
restarted.
that happens,
And
too.
we had that incident like we spoke about, it seems like maybe it's been about a year ago now, where we had that really bad MVA, motor vehicle accident at Spruce Creek and Nova. And we specifically questioned that because, and I'm kind of going by memory here, the response time that we got from the county seemed relatively reasonable. But it was only when we looked into it and we realized, wait a minute, it took 30 plus minutes or whatever that really extensive amount of time was to get an available ambulance to respond. So even though it may have got there in 7, 8, or 9 minutes, it turned out to be a 30 plus or 40 minute response time. And so I guess that's something I wrestle with, is the definition of the response time. And I think when you look at this and with the notation they've got on their sheet themselves,
Right,
that's clear.
Methodology 3.
So
But-
we're not really comparing apples to apples on response
well,
time,
we're
per se.
comparing apples to apples following this. The problem you have, and remember I started off by saying there's a lot more we need to be addressing. The ambulance could be available and they're just not dispatching. I mean, so
That's a
we
problem.
don't know how
But
how
that's a-
that translates into thing. We do know there were problems in the dispatch center, that there were disagreements on what was an emergency and what wasn't. And we do know they're undergoing major changes. In fact, you're probably gonna see these numbers improve over time as they begin to get a hold and the new administration over there begins to get better control over the dispatch center. I ran a very large dispatch center when I was in Illinois, when I was in Buffalo, and I can tell you it's a horror experience, but they make a huge difference in how it works. But the problem isn't just availability of ambulance. The problem is how we identify them, the protocols we use to, and where we place them and where we keep them. So there's a large conversation going on at the county level. They're taking a serious look at the whole thing. I know the fire chiefs are involved with it, and hopefully everyone will take a handle in it, because it's all about our health too. So I think we have a solid base here, and now we've got to take a look at the things that also feed into here and affect that.
But I just don't want the public to be misled into thinking that from the call of 911 to the ambulance getting there is this time, because that's not
In
accurate.
most cases, it is. In most
disagree.
cases, well,
disagree.
take a look.
Yeah, I have.
I'll
I
get
mean,
those
I
numbers
disagree.
for you too.
Right.
But that's easy. I looked at it. What you're talking about is also outliers, but,
Because their protocol is to dispatch a fire and an ambulance at the same time.
correct,
That's how it's
Yep.
supposed to work.
yeah.
But when it's not available, the fire response time starts right away, because it's going. And that lag time or outlier, or whatever we want to call it, of 10, 20,
Correct.
30 minutes, however long, that doesn't start the response time until that first ambulance becomes in service and
And-
now is on the way.
That is one of the reasons why I agree with the current system now, even though it's resource heavy, of dispatching 2 units as opposed to just 1, which in a lot of cities,
Yeah, I think you
they
have
will
to.
just dispatch an ambulance, they won't bother with a fire unit. So we have a backup, an automatic backup, and I think that's a good thing, the way the current system is
Now,
designed.
the 2 ambulances that they've told you they're committed to adding, are those BLS or ALS units?
They said ALS, but we'll see. That's being,
Okay, because
that's-
I'm told in the budget it's BLS.
I don't know. If you want to change, they're very open to it, and I think one of the things we can do as a city is to get involved in that conversation. And I think we ought to. And I don't know if 2's enough. I would like to go, you know, for 4 units right away. Well, 2 at one point, and they're supposed to add 2 later. So I would like to see 4 right away in the current budget cycle.
I've been told, I know they're not all starting right away, but I was told that they're all 4 are ALS units,
That's-
and that there are 4 in the budget for next year. It's
Mhm.
not,
I think,
It-
I
it
think
is
Alan
staggered.
will provide you some, I think he's got the information on that, on what isn't actually in the budget. He's got their budget book.
And let's remember that those
No.
4 units, if added, are countywide. And this is an awful big county, and it's already understaffed, so it's not,
they're playing catch up.
it's better if it
They're playing
happens, but
catch-up,
it's
no doubt.
it's not a fix, it's,
Well, as I always said, when you're playing with statistics and numbers like this, it's a curve out there. I think it was by Pareto, but I can't remember who did it, but the course gets steeper and steeper the more perfect you want to get.
That's Pareto.
So,
Before we get, diverge too much from, this is just response time, why don't we hear the, Alan's presentation, and then we will go ahead and dive into the rest of this, debate, so that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves.
Good evening, Alan Rosen, Assistant City Manager. Before what was the, I was talking to somebody else. What was the question about something else?
Do you have the actual county budget on whether they're BLS or?
Yeah, I talked,
ALS,
I looked
and
through
how
their
many?
proposed budget books, their proposed budget book, and talked to people in the budget office to make sure and get answers. And Councilman Ford, we may be hearing 2 different things from different people. What I was told was that they are hiring 8 EMS people and getting 2 new ambulances to run those 2 units, and that they are specifically BLS, but the upside to them is that what they're going to do is use those units for inter-facility transports between hospitals to be able to have the ALS units on the road more. So it has a net effect of adding more ALS on the street. That's what I heard.
Did they give you any, I mean, was it one time supposed to be 4 ALS and now it's dropped all the way down to 2 BLS? Or do we not know?
That's my feeling, because I know just anecdotally we had heard that they were going to do 4, but in the budget book and the numbers, in black and white, it's 8 EMTs and 2 units.
It sounds like it's
And
a
two
non-peak
BLS.
load operation, so it's available 24/7 or at least 5
They'll be-
days a week.
Yeah, they'll
24
be there
hours.
those units will be on 24/7 because it's 8 people for the 2 units, and they
Whether
do
it's
12-hour
peak or
shifts.
non-peak, it's those hospital rides that are tying up a lot of ambulance time.
Yeah.
Going from hospital to hospital, going from hospital to hospital, not even in Volusia County even.
Yeah, and if you read through the book, they're actually purchasing a lot more vehicles than that. And I was like, wow, they're going to purchase a lot of vehicles, but it turns out I think most of those are just replacements.
Mhm.
If you look at their fleet program, replacements for vehicles that are already there. There's 2 brand new ones to add to the capacity.
because
So,
they're transporting patients to Orlando on a daily basis.
So, yeah, I do want to thank Councilman Ford. We kind of like tag team them. So he was looking at transport times, and I kind of focused in on revenue. So it's different, obviously, than what you were just talking about before. Covers a different aspect, and just kind of give you an idea of what the forecast that I came up with for what you might be able to see in terms of our proposed budget and the proposed revenue that you might see based on actual historical information and what that means at least this coming year. And I apologize that this is not more fun. I didn't have that much time to put the fun aspects I usually do into it. So hopefully it's not.
We didn't want to be here till 8 o'clock anyway.
Yeah. So current budget proposal, I know that you saw 4 line firefighters. 3 of those were dedicated more towards EMS transport, overtime training, other operational expenditures. That part of the budget right now is about $362,885. And then, of course, one time for a fully equipped transport unit, annual replacement costs about $168,000. So that's the current budget proposal if you want to go to transport next year. And that proposal would be only doing transport during peak times Monday through Friday. So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, not 24/7. Just to, that's a good part of this. So I did get, I do want to thank the county. I did finally reach a right person to get me information, and they were very helpful in getting me this information. So we start out with, and you'll see this progression here, by the way. I wanted to talk about this. Basically, I took this from a standpoint of what do you have to do first, second, and third to be able to forecast this out, and I follow along that progression, and you'll see that in this presentation, till we get to the actual revenue forecast. So we'll follow piece by piece by piece. So you got to figure out, first of all, if you want to figure out how much money you're going to make, you got to figure out how many transports you're going to have from Port Orange. And you'll see there's a little bit of difference in numbers from what Councilman Ford said, and I think there's a couple of reasons for this. Again, you ask, like you're saying statistics, you ask one person one thing and one person something else. If you don't ask the exact right thing, you're going to get something else. And neither of them are wrong information, they're just different sets of data. Part of this is these are fiscal years. I'm not sure if those were calendar years. This excludes all intra-facility transports. It does not include those because we would not be doing them, so it wouldn't really matter to us. I'm not going to build off of those numbers. I'm only going to build off of actual emergency and non-emergency transport from the city of Port Orange. The total transports from Port Orange, I did a forecast for 2018 because that's through June. The numbers I had were through June, so I forecasted out. It is a little bit lower. It seems like a little bit of an anomaly, but you can see it's pretty steady from 17 to 16, about 4,100 transports. And I saw this from other cities too. It was very stable over the last couple of years, the number of total transports. And again, this does not include inter-facility transports. And all this information, most of the information you're going to see is from the Volusia County Sheriff Tiburon dispatch data.
Now, just to be clear, because 16 and 17 are roughly the same, and 18 that's a partial year.
That is a forecast for an entire year. The partial year, we're only at like 2,000 right now.
Okay.
And these are not calls for service, these are actual transports. So calls for service are going to be a lot larger.
So that is a significant drop over the past 2 years.
Yeah, being the 2 years
A
are...
forecast drop.
It's a forecast. Now so I looked at that and I'm having the same question you are, is why is it so low? And I haven't called them to ask for the answer, and I couldn't figure out the answer because what I did is, usually when you forecast, you look at a couple of things. Historical, what's going to happen in the future, and also, is there seasonality? Do we do more of something in this portion of the year than we do in that part of the year, and that's why it's lower now, but it's going to bump its way up towards the end of the year. The other thing is I looked at all transports throughout the entire county to see what their trend was. Maybe their trend was down too, and okay, it makes sense that the county's down. I'm forecasting that the county is going to see 6% more transports this year than they did last year. So that didn't make any sense. I looked at the seasonality. Did we generally have more transports at the end of the year, fiscal year, than we do at the beginning? The answer was no. So I can't give you an answer. All I can say is when you see at the end, I'm going to give you a range of kind of, because numbers you can pick one out here and one out there. I'm going to give you the best case scenario I could come up with the historical information and the worst case scenario I could come up with historical information. So I didn't want to pin you to one number and say that was going to be it.
We might not be looking back historically far enough if you're at 80% of the last 2 years in your forecast. You're probably talking about a confidence interval about 85% in your forecast, and we need to be closer to a confidence interval of 95. So you might need to go back at least 2 more years and have 5 rolling years. The disparity is just too great. That's not enough data.
When I looked at, I did have, and I didn't copy it here, but I do have total transport data and total calls for service for the county-wide. And I can tell you that 3,100 for some reason may be a little low, and I'm not sure what's going on there. But I can tell you county-wide over since 2011, 2012, when the county took it over, the number of transports and the number of transports, not calls for service, big distinction. The number of transports has remained relatively stable. I would say it's gone from, if I remember correctly, 48,000 to 52,000 over that time frame, up and down. Yeah,
Well, and
whole county.
here's my problem. Here I've got 5,978 transports historically. There you've got 4,000, 4,100, and then you've got a number that's 80% lower than the 2 years. That data doesn't make sense, and that's before I even compare that data to this data, which is supposed to be approximately the same thing. and yet this data has 50% more calls on it. So we
No.
ain't close. These numbers don't work.
Now, is that calls for service or transports?
These are transports, right?
No.
No.
Calls for service.
Here's the calls for service, right? No, here's the transport.
Transports on the other page says 4307
Yeah.
Okay.
for last year.
And
But
so
these
at,
are the actual calls for service for Port Orange, was 4311, I was.
So we had 6,000 calls, and then roughly 4,000 of those calls were transports.
Yeah.
And you had 4307,
and these do not include interfacility transports. I excluded those.
which probably is the 300 or
Right.
so
These,
difference
these,
between last year.
Methodology 1, performance data includes all fire and pre-hospital medical incidents, administrative incident types, bed delays, interfacility transfers, and special detail incidents are not included.
So
That was in Bob's,
And I just
Methodology
want to
one.
talk about what we're talking about.
Now the reason, and I'll give you a reason I excluded those specifically. If we do plus, we're not going to be doing those. And I don't want to build your revenue data off of something you're not going to be doing.
Sure.
It'd be a bad number. So that's why you're seeing those differences.
And the difference between that and this makes sense, but the difference between this and this does not make sense.
I couldn't figure it out based on all the data I looked at. I couldn't get a reason why. And I didn't get a chance to ask them why it looks so low for this year.
Okay.
But again, you'll see a range at
but-
the end.
And I'm sure that you're going to get into this a little bit more moving on, Captain PowerPoint and all that you are, but these numbers have to make sense.
Yeah, but
They just do.
You can only go with what they give them. That's all, and that's been the
Yeah.
historical problem.
Give or take 1,000.
Yeah. I mean, if you went in with an average of the last 2 years of 4,000, you'll see how it kicks out at the end.
Yeah.
Difference. So,
so, no,
If the numbers don't make sense,
I
that's why I'm
retract.
saying, go get more years of data. You do a rolling 5 years instead of a rolling 3 if they don't work.
and I can tell you that countywide, not looking at the other cities, I got 3 years of data for the cities. Countywide, it's much more stable than I thought it would have been. And again, not calls for service, but actual transports, much more stable. Part of that countywide, I think, is because the calls for service have increased. But then you start seeing the cities get into the Plus program, and the reason their transports have stabilized is because so many cities have got into the program. They're sucking up that that workload for them. Okay, to peak hour transport. So again, as I told you before, the thought process, crawl, walk, run, is the first year you would be getting into it, you would not be doing 24/7 transport. You would be doing 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. So
Basically 72 hours of the 168-hour week get half the calls.
it's, yes. While it's 36% of the hours, more of the transports are during that time of day. And this is actual data, again, from Tebron. They got me the total transports, which you see here, but also only those transports that occurred during that time frame. Because again, if those are the calls you're going to run, that's the revenue source you're going to be drawing from. I can't pull from the whole pool. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So that was in the last couple of years between 49 and 48% of all the calls.
50%, okay.
Yeah. So I also kind of looked at what I want to figure out is we have other units in the area that do the Plus program. Great, I know the number of calls that we have, but what is everybody else seeing in terms of the amount of transports they're actually getting toned to? So that's also a different number that you need to take into account. Based on other people's experience, what could we expect to get? If we get 4,000 calls, or if we get 4,000 transports, what percentage of those are we actually going to get toned out to? Okay, so I looked at the last 3 years of data, and I just got South Daytonians. I didn't have a chance to add them in there, but they're in the low 2 to 3 to teens % as you go through the years. Daytona Beach, this is 2016, 2017, and 18, you'll see these numbers. Daytona Beach only did about 3%, but you're talking about 3% of almost 12,000. They had one unit.
They have none now.
They have none now, that's correct. You'll see that when we go to 2018, there's an NA, and that's because they're not in it yet. They're not in it anymore. New Smyrna Beach, they just started out kind of like right after 2016. I guess they were doing a couple in fiscal year 2016, so that's why they're so low. You'll see their number increase. Edgewater and Ponce Inlet are between 91 and 98%. You'll see that trend remain the same. And there are a couple of reasons for that you see these huge differences. Think about the geographic location of these cities. They're on, quote unquote, the edge of the earth for Volusia County. And so it makes sense for them to do most of their transports because they're so far away from the center of where EVAC transports from and when they go in and out of service. So they've taken over a majority of their calls. Edgewater has a lot too, much more than some of the others because they actually run 2 units. I wouldn't say most of the time or all the time. I don't know what percentage of the time. When I was talking to the city manager there, he says he has between 1 and 2 units on all the time, 24/7. So that's why you see their numbers are much higher percentage of the calls that they get than others as well. So in 2017, Daytona Beach does about the same. New Smyrna starts picking up because this is their really first full year of the Plus program, so it's much higher, obviously. Edgewater and Ponce Inlet, again, they're relatively about the same. They've stayed the same over the last couple of years. And now you see, as Bob Ford has indicated, Daytona Beach has gotten out of the business in 2018, so they're an NA. New Smyrna's up to 21%, and again, Edgewater, Ponce Inlet remain about the same. So it seems like for New Smyrna, the thing I liked about New Smyrna, at least comparable, is that they're just adjacent to us. While they are a little bit farther south, they're not as in the middle of nowhere as some of the other agencies. And and they also have 1 unit, not 2. The other agencies also have 1 unit. It's only Edgewater that has 2 sometimes. So that's what the information that I had to draw on. And then,
Alan, I'm sorry,
yes.
go back. New Smyrna, are they 24/7?
They are.
They okay.
All of the other agencies are 24/7.
So like New Smyrna, 343 transports. That's 24/7 availability.
That is correct.
So they're doing less than 1 a day.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
Wow. I thought it'd be more than that. Okay.
That's, again, this is Volusia County Sheriff to run dispatch data. What I asked for is all the transports from each locality and who did those transports. And keep in mind, this isn't the only data too, because they're not just transporting, New Smyrna is not just transporting, and you've heard this and you know this. New Smyrna and all the other cities are not just transporting their own citizens, they're transporting citizens from the other areas that lack
Like
ambulance
ours,
support
yeah.
as well. South Daytona, which again, I don't have the data on here, is even more than the others. I think specifically because of their geographic location. They're right next to Daytona Beach. 50% of their calls are not within their city. 50% of their calls are to other localities, including us. So they help us as well. So this is a little bit involved here. And this number is something we had to guess at, not the 19 and the 21, but the 50%, and I'll give you this in a second. So you have to look at, okay, the number of peak transports, which you saw before, the last couple of years. So you assume these are your peak transports that you'd have to draw from, all of them, during the time frame that we think we're going to do next year if we go into the program the way we are. Then you have to look at the percentage of time we would get toned out to those incidents. So 19 and 21, that's New Smyrna data, right? 21 is their last year. 19 is the average of the year before and the current year. So it was like 16 and 21 or 18 and 21. Anyway, the average is 19. So I had to pick, like, I wanted to give everybody kind of a range, right? So I'm trying to look for high, medium, low. The high is significantly higher. Just want you to keep that in mind. And I think the 50% really comes from, there's been some push, and thanks actually to the mayor and some people from the council talking with their counterparts at the county to push for something akin to or more close to closest unit response, because that's how most of the other counties up and down the East Coast do it. And it would give cities a little bit more stability and guarantee into, if you got into this program, what would you be doing? Because if it's not closest unit response, and it's, I forget what the term that they use now for how they do it, it's a little bit more kind of all over the place and you're not really sure when you're going to get called. 50% is kind of the split between what you see in Edgewater and Ponce Inlet and where New Smyrna Beach is kind of right now, which kind of makes sense if you think about Ponce Inlet and Edgewater. It almost is closest unit response because EVAC doesn't always have something down there. They don't have as many resources down there because it's in the edges of the county. So I split the difference. Had to come up with a number of what might possibly be, and this is it. But when you look at it, it could be any range in between. It could be higher, it could be lower. But I had to give it, I had to put something on
Can I
it.
just interject for just 1 second?
Yeah.
What do you mean they don't always have somebody down there?
What do I mean they don't?
I know we're here to represent the citizens of Port Orange,
Yeah.
but from a fundamental perspective, they're obligated to provide that service to the entire county. How do you arbitrarily just say, well, you know what, from State Road 44 South, we're not really gonna have anybody down there?
It'll be hit or miss.
I mean, that fundamentally just makes no logic. There's no sense to that.
I wouldn't
How do you
say
discount
I wouldn't say
residents like that?
I wouldn't say they never have anybody down there, but I don't want to speculate.
Yeah,
I have
but-
my thoughts, but they're my
I'll-
personal thoughts. I don't
I'll
want to
I
speculate.
guess maybe it was a
Use
comment,
the
I
word
wasn't necessarily looking
seldom.
for an answer,
If,
but.
if you know you've got units down there that can respond, you can deploy your ambulances further away and hedge your bets.
Okay, you said my thought for me.
So you-
Would that
Which is
also
something
be,
I'm kind of scared for us.
They call that masking the problem.
Yeah.
would that also be a result here? Suppose we add a plus program, they say, you know what, we've got one in Port Orange now, we'll divert ours somewhere else.
It would be a
What that
possibility.
is gonna
If they're
use.
doing
So
that somewhere
the
else,
computer
would they
may
not
do
do
it,
that here?
But
Their
then we
prob-
get more transports.
Their program strategically locates these units where they're needed. If we're in their program, their algorithm is gonna strategically locate their mobile units where they need to be. If we put a stationary unit, say at 73, it's gonna show up and the algorithm's gonna kick in and their evac units are gonna mobilize to the best strategic location to maximize the chance of doing what they need to do with what they have. You know, if by happenstance there's one evac in Station 73 and those are the only two, I can imagine there's one gonna be here at 73 and there's one gonna be in Deltona. And if the guy was sitting at Wawa and we go down to 2, he's going to Deltona.
Right.
That's what it's a computer algorithm that
And that's, the concern is, how does it end up being an enhancement?
We're
And-
not enhancing, we're simply helping the county out. We're
So-
enhancing
so-
Deltona.
So, what I wasn't gonna say is from the perspective of saving lives, which that's what this is all about.
Absolutely.
Another ambulance in the region is better than not another ambulance in the region.
Absolutely.
So if they're coming up with 3 and we're coming up with 1, there's 4 more ambulances in the region that can save any one of our lives or our parents' lives or our neighbors' lives or somebody in Daytona's life. That's all I got to go on with that. But any additional is better. The question is, do you want to pay for it?
I'm also
That's
got
the question.
concerns if it breaks down by socioeconomic lines. If we house an ambulance at 73, that ambulance that sits at Wawa East, all of a sudden maybe it's in South Daytona or it's at the Pavilion, and it ends up answering calls on the west side of town, and we end up answering all the calls on our east side of town. And that's a socioeconomic divide that it's got to be a service enhancement for everybody.
So are we buying an ambulance for revenue, or are we buying an ambulance to save lives?
Save
And who
lives.
cares
There
whether
you
they
go.
make $100,000 or no $1,000?
Okay,
Philosophical
That's
conversation.
and that's the philosophical question. Of course, the bottom line is we still got to pay for it.
Yep.
When the county has unbillable ambulance calls, they supplement those calls out of their general fund. We wouldn't be able to do that when we have uncollectible debt. So, and not only that, we'd be paying then 10% for the privilege of sending a bill, and I can tell you it doesn't cost 75 cents to print out a piece of paper and put a stamp on an envelope. So not only that's a concern as well, are we supplementing their ability to pay for their non-collections through our collections, and then we have to suck it up with our non-collections? Is this a life-saving device that we're talking about? Yeah, but we've got to pay for it too.
A problem also that we should look at is, which was part of the thrust of the News Journal editorial, is this system was designed to move towards a countywide. It was the first of many years ago when this was put into place, and as evac evolved, it was going to be a countywide system. As you integrate into that model a greater level of complexity by having individual departments or cities providing or not providing resources, providing them at different levels at different times of the day, you're really impacting cost and complexity of the system. The more complex it gets, trying to schedule units differently, because they come from different cities, they all don't work for you. It's going to get more likely to make mistakes and more likely to cost you more. So one of the problems is the answer is, which I go back to, is it's not for Port Orange or South Daytona and the rest to be adding units, but the county take its responsibilities seriously. It
Which they're
is
not
the
doing.
county's function. It is the county's responsibility. It's theirs. They run it. They're in charge of it. The whole thing, anything that gets done, they have to approve. And we need to hold their feet to the fire, not put Band-Aids over where things are not working to our expectations. So, you know, again, all I see is a more complex mess coming and more expense for the citizens of Port Orange, without necessarily any increase in safety here. Because what I see happening is we're picking up the growth for the county. You know, so we're gonna have some, you know, who's gonna do Margaritaville and all that, and we'll probably see our ambulance heading in that direction. So I don't know.
Let's let Alan finish the presentation and then,
I can't get a flow on.
because we are talking about what we're talking about here when we talk cost. In your data, I do have this question. Is there any kind of breakdown over where people are getting transported to?
I've received that before from the county, but not for this.
Okay, because
I
I
can
think
get
that's
that.
important, because if we're transporting, where we're transporting to affects how long our guys and girls are offline,
That is correct.
and where and why. So I think that's a very important part of the equation.
Yeah.
Is if Halifax Port Orange is taking, if 3/4 of these calls are of emergency basis when they come in, granted, and Port Orange Halifax is able to take the bulk of them, then that's an incredible efficiency. If we're having to transport to Daytona and then wait in line when we get there, whether it's an emergency call or not, that is a lot of time we're paying for people to be offline and to not have the protection of the ambulance in the city to answer other calls. So I think that's an important piece that we need to go get as well.
We actually discussed that a little bit today because I did think about that, although I don't have the numbers. When I did get the numbers for another analysis that we did maybe a year ago, I do remember, and I'm not going to tell you the numbers because I don't remember exactly, but I do remember the majority of the transports from here were to Halifax Hospital in Daytona. Less of them were to here.
And that's troubling. I know that the Halifax's strategy is changing, and I need to know how that has impacted. Is the load changed or not?
Yeah.
And how long those crews spend. The county has the data. They know how long their crews are offline at Halifax because they have to stay with the patients, whether they're coming critical or not. They have to stay with the patient. And the non-critical cases, if they basically wait in line just like anybody in the waiting room to get checked in, and that's more time our guys are offline 2 cities away.
Yeah. The analysis that I did today, kind of on the back of the napkin, is not going to help philosophically, but I did look at, based on the numbers that you see here in terms of number of transports, even if we hit the maximum number of transports that we thought we could hit with what we're going to do, which is 981, I kind of thought about what's the average time you're out of pocket when you're on a call. Let's say it takes 6 to 9 minutes to get there. You're on scene for 10 or 15 minutes. You travel to the hospital. Maybe there's a bed wait. Then you got to drive back. maybe you're out of pocket for an hour, hour and 15 minutes at a time on average. If you take that and figure out how many you can physically do in a 12-hour period, 5 days a week, it's more than 981, so I didn't hit up against that maximum. I just wanted to at least see that, so theoretically.
I told you I was gonna let you continue, then I asked you a
That's
complex
okay.
question.
No, look, I'm a geek, but I find it interesting, so. What was that?
Right.
Hey, he's owning it. He's owning it.
It was chief.
All right, so just to go back to this, just to give you an idea of the spread, again, it's kind of busy, but it gives you an idea of, based on the peak transports of what we might do next year if we went to this, based on the percentage of time we might be toned out to these things, you're looking at anywhere between 297 transports a year and 981 transports a year.
Between, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
270,
297,
297,
and 981. Again, this is, you're talking about the weird number that you have this year of
Got it.
probably 1561 transports. If you even write that out and just say, forget about it, this data is weird for this year, let's look at the 1986 and 1992, you're looking at anywhere still between 377 and 981. So there's a big spread, depending on the percentage of time you get called out. And it also depends a lot on what the county goes to. Again, I've heard a lot of, we're definitely going to closest unit, but that's something that, I think a lawyer might say, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV, right? Is you want to get that in the contract to say that's what we're going to do, so you know exactly what
That
to
is
expect.
absolutely critical to us. I'm not gonna buy something that I can't, I'm not gonna have an ambulance that sits in the bay waiting for a call.
So, Mayor, as Councilman Ford mentioned, there's a few city managers and fire chiefs working with the county through that now with positive results that I think will be sealing that deal in the short term here, probably, whether we get one or not.
And I would say, earlier on when we were analyzing this, that was also one of my great concerns, is that there's no guarantee, and I heard from somebody from the county's mouth, I'll never guarantee that you're ever toned out at all. It could be anything, but looking at the historical data from the other cities, I just, that's not going to happen. We'll be toned out. It's just how much. So the typical average charge per transport, I got this from the finance department at the county. This is based on their current rates. This is what the EVAC charges, not what they bring in. But their typical charge per transport is $627. The typical mileage charge is $77. They charge like $11 or $12 per mile, so that gives you an idea of like the average transport is 7 miles. And total is $704. So I use that to figure out if you have an exceeding amount of transports next year based on the data that you've seen, 993, and the average bill is 704, the gross billing would be almost 700,000. Don't salivate yet because we got to take some numbers off the top here. The median number from the 2 slides above, if you were in the middle range between the 297 and 993, looking at about 412 transport at $704 a year, you're looking at $290,000. And then the low, of course, of $208,000. And again, the reason there's such disparity between the mid and the low is one is absolutely 100% closest unit transport versus historical information from the city that's closest to us. And it is a huge difference, so please keep that in mind. I also got the historical collection rate just specifically from Port Orange residents, which is great information because I don't want collection rates from everybody else because the demographics in each location is very different. If we were going to be doing transport and the majority of our transports were people in Port Orange, which it would likely be even if we're transporting to and from other cities, the county themselves, this is their gross billings for the last 3 years, and fiscal year is 18 is to date. I didn't forecast. They collect anywhere between 55, 56, and 48% of their billings. And fiscal year 2018 is probably going to be a little bit lower because you got a couple of months of lag. When you bill something, it may not come in right away. And so
Is that why that's 48%?
I believe that's why that's 48%, because if you put out a billing this year, if you put out a billing out last year or 2 years ago, the chances that you've already got it back are much higher than if you just built something now and you haven't gotten it back yet. So since this is through July 31st, 2018, there are some bills that have went out that haven't been come back yet, and that's most likely why it's
Can we
lower.
verify that that's the case? Because that's essential. That's a 7-8% spread, that's almost 10% of your revenue. We need to find out if that is actually the case, because in the past years, you still have bills that don't get paid at the end of the year, but you're also collecting previous year's bills at the beginning of the year. So
Yep.
we need to verify that.
Yeah,
So,
and, go ahead.
So in the middle of a fiscal year, I understand that number might be higher or lower, but you're verifying something that hasn't concluded yet, and there's too many variables that could even sway that number more toward the end. So we'll verify those numbers, but even those numbers, because they're not
Well,
historic,
one way or the
they're
other,
still
we need-
living, are still. I wouldn't. I mean, we'll get the numbers and verify them, but I still wouldn't sell my soul on a percentage, because something could happen at the end of the year.
I get that, but this is why the validity of the numbers and how they're, if you've got a 2-month lag in billing, then you need to take 2 months of income off and recalculate it. Or we need to
add 2 months, and
one way or the other,
that's
extrapolate it.
why extrapolation is a guess too.
One way or the other,
Just
though. I
be
mean,
careful on the
that
current year.
48% number is not a valid number, so maybe if
Get
we
rid
can't,
of FY18.
yeah, add,
That's what we ought to do.
get 15, 14, get other additional years
Get
on there
15 and
to validate
15.
the 55 and 56 on there.
The other thing in
If
the
we've only
business,
got 2 good years of data.
don't ever count what they bill, because I believe all the insurance companies, or the major ones at least, and Medicare and Medicaid, refuse to pay the rate and have a standard rate.
Medicare and Medicaid have negotiated rates versus private pay insurance.
And I mean, it's
And they're all different.
unbelievably how much lower it is. It's generally about half.
Yeah, and the reason you see gross billings and cash collected is because that'll factor directly into your revenue, because they're collecting it for you. I have to know what their collection rate is and then take 10% off that, because that's what they'll charge you to get to what you may make. And you're right. Well, I got this came from a whole big spreadsheet of information that they gave me of their current billing rates, and there is specific stuff on there that says what they charge, but what the Medicaid rate is, what other insurance companies will pay them, which is lower than what they bill. So based on the Volusia collection rate of 55, 56, 48%, I take 10%. The reason this is not, I take 10% off that to get what we get. The reason you don't see the correlation of 10% is because it's 10% of the actual dollars that they get, not the percent.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm taking 10% off of their actual cash collected and then dividing that by what they got. So, and thank you, Tracy, for helping point that out.
That is a terrific distinction.
Yeah. It's basically 5 or 10 points up, plus or minus.
10% of half is roughly 5%.
There you go.
So we have 50% collection rate.
So starting to put this all together, looking at total transports, the peak transports that we would do if we went Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, the share of the calls being the highest at 50% if it was definitely closest unit response versus the typical call out rate for, let's say, New Smyrna Beach, one of our close neighbors, and the collection rate that we saw, right? If you kind of add all that up and you basically come up with a revenue of the highest for next year being 263,593, 108,634, or 67,678. Now, this also, I didn't put the note here, this is actually only 75% of the revenue that you would expect to see in a normal year, because if we started next year, as we just talked about, you're not going to see all that revenue till the following year. You're going to get that 48, you're most likely going to get that 49, 50%, but it's not going to follow till the next fiscal year. So you'll get it, it just won't be that fiscal year. So it's not, your total revenue in the end is going to be higher, but this is just a fiscal year look. The operating cost is what we talked about in one of the first slides, which is the 3 firefighters, a little bit of overtime, and ongoing operating costs to run that unit. So your best case scenario, based on historical information and based on closest unit response, you're looking at a total net revenue of minus 99,000, so an additional cost to the city, let's say, of $100,000, mid $254,000 cost, and low $295,000 overall cost. So that's a net cost or net revenue, however you want to say it. That does not include the $168,000 in capital for the unit, but again, that's a one-time thing. I'm
sorry, Alan,
Yes.
do we know if the county in their ALS ambulances, do they run three-man crews in their ALSs, or is that just because we run ALS for,
Two.
Yeah.
so when they respond with an ambulance, they respond with two?
Yes.
But our plan's to respond with three?
No, sir.
Okay.
Two.
No,
We're
okay,
gonna respond with two.
all right, that, and. Gotcha. Okay.
Alan, quick question.
Yes, sir.
As if the county has roughly 50, evacs available and only about 20 or so in use, are they not amenable to letting the cities use their extra vehicles if they're adding the Plus program?
That'd be a big liability back and forth. I
That's
don't.
what I wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
That'll never happen.
We could shift the liability, she said.
Just a thought.
She's feeding me the answers.
This also
Oh, you mean
doesn't,
you're doing teamwork? Whoa.
this
Teamwork
also
makes the
does
dream
not
work.
include, the less wear and tear on the engine once we stop, engine, replying with, or
Yeah.
responding with an engine. We just can't quantify that at this point.
Now, the original plan, I think that was brought forward was, again, crawl, walk, run. So we'd be talking about, if it's council's direction, this was just the plan that was brought forth earlier. The plan was brought forth earlier, included beginning with 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. The next step would be 24/7 with one ambulance. And then the step after that would be 2 ambulances 24/7. So what I want you to keep in mind, this was just basically the same net data that you saw on the previous slide. But what I want you to keep in mind is once you have fixed cost, the more calls you run, the more revenue you're going to get. It's kind of like running a business. You've got your fixed cost. The more business you bring in, the more revenue you're going to have. And also, again, this first year of revenue only includes 3/4 of the year where it's going to bump up that next year because you're going to start seeing a full year of revenue each year. So that's the revenue data I have for you tonight.
So. Go ahead, guys, you got questions, ask away, it's a workshop.
I'll just comment that for me at least, having some revenue to offset the cost is certainly important, but that's not the driving factor here for me. So I appreciate the time and the effort, and I get that until you do it, you're not going to really know. And there's other factors like Jake spoke about. If the city managers and the fire chiefs and all the folks involved collectively can stick to a theoretical agreement and functional agreement that we will do a closest unit transport model, that's a factor that's not in those 2016 and 2017 numbers. So I think that's going to be important, especially for us, because that's from day one. That's always been my breaking point. Is I got to have confidence that's how it's going to be to do this. Revenue projections, I quite honestly would want to be incredibly conservative in understanding that and be pleasantly surprised, perhaps. But that's not my driving factor. My driving factor is improving the public safety element of this for our residents and increasing survivability chances for, emergency calls and stuff like that. So, but I appreciate the work that you put in on the revenue side of it, because we need to know that. We need to have an idea. I just think as we're factoring that, and if we're building that element into our budget, then we should just be conservative with that. You know what I mean? I don't want to pick a high number and say we're going to hit this mark, and I just don't want to do that. I don't think that's the right way to go either. So.
Yeah, I'm fine with the middle number
Yeah,
myself.
yeah, yeah.
And I do have a question actually for staff. When we presented the budget numbers, it did not include any potential revenue for this
We were
program, did
just
it?
talking about, it does not, we'll throw it into our, menu to
I'm
show
sorry,
you where.
revenue for,
For
This-
transport.
This
This is not
revenue
included.
projection is not in the budget whatsoever yet.
So the last time, based on the last presentation that you got, it showed the expense, the $362,000. But if you were to look at that, sometimes, very rightfully, you make comments, well, was that the net cost? Because does that bring in any revenue? So instead of 362,000, if we were bring in some sort of this revenue or run this many calls, the net cost would go from 362 to somewhere between 295 and 99. But I agree, finance and budget people, where I come from budget, we tend to be very conservative because we don't want to over guess and then have to run scrambling at the end of the year.
and I apologize for taking shots at your numbers, but that's what I do. You know that.
Question. We're now going to, we respond to all these calls in Port Orange anyway. Is this going to save us? We're obviously not, are we gonna send an engine including to a call as well as our ambulance? Or can we, just send one?
Ken Fuston, Fire Chief. It really depends on the nature of the call, sir. If it's a non-emergency call, we might send a rescue only. If it's a traumatic injury in our MVA, we're going to get at least 2 units. It's going to be very call dependent. But there will be a very good opportunity here to reduce the wear and tear on some of our most expensive assets.
Chief, who makes that decision? How many units? At what
We
point
have a
is the
matrix set
protocol?
up. The Southeast has their own matrix. The county has a generalized response matrix. We can change it as needed. But for the most part, it's fairly standardized across the board. Some cities who utilize the two-man engine companies have to send twice the resources just to get enough people on the scene. We run three-man companies. If we have a non-emergent call, there's a good chance we'll only send the rescue, and that would be it.
Yeah, I'm thinking because the mix changes too, because I mean, we are a whole lot more medical than we are fire. So the
It's,
rate.
yeah, if you add in all of the invalid assists and everything that we do, we're probably running about 69–70% medical calls, based off of last year's statistics.
I'm sorry, Bob. Keep going.
No, I would expect that so if we're sending an ambulance to a medical call, we would also send, we wouldn't send an additional unit, right? Just
It is dependent on the call nature, sir.
okay, so for example, heart attack,
You're going to get 2 companies.
2 companies.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because a heart attack is a critical call.
So you would have 4 people working on him?
Hopefully 5.
5?
At least 5 in Port Orange.
There's a lot going on with something.
You would send an engine to,
Absolutely.
It wouldn't change. They're going now. They're going now.
Non-critical call would be a different story.
mhm.
Any one of these paramedics in the room can tell you, the more hands you have on an ALS patient, the better.
You have more than 2 people in the emergency room when you cut your finger.
Yep.
Most of them are trying
I
to get
can
your
tell by the
insurance number.
size of the bill I get.
I would like to offer, and I know that you seem to have a question on New Smyrna Beach's calls, Mayor, and I went back and just did a quick rundown on the email that I'd received from Chief Vandermark.
Yeah.
And January 1 to date, they've already transported 520 times. But I think the data that Alan had may not include all that specific time frame, but they're transporting a ton.
Okay.
So they're from January 1 to date, or actually to August 1, I estimated 520.
Yeah, my numbers were just through June.
Chief, how many times did they
Yeah.
So
come
they're
here?
averaging over 2 a day and not 1.5.
Say, I'm
How
sorry.
many times did New Smyrna come here?
I don't know
for
off
our-
the top of my head.
okay.
I could get that data for you. I don't know that off the top
I'm
of
just
my head.
curious. Just
250 divided by 210.
Okay.
500. How many calls so far this year?
520.
How do we keep the county from backing out of ambulance service and turning it all over to us? Of course, it is a loss.
Well, are you asking for my opinion, sir?
Could become a major expense now. You know, how
Fi-
do we keep? and-
Fire-based transport is the way to go. We are the only county in coastal Florida who operates this way. That tells me we're not doing it right.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree, but we need to have different agreements, and a whole bunch of changes in the system. Because right now, we're carving it all together with Band-Aids. That's my concern. You know, we're not ready for it yet. Until we get through, new county administration that seems to be much more open and flexible. We need to work with them. When I came into the county to work in the mid-80s, the whole push was consolidation. Now we're beginning to deconsolidate, so I guess the pattern, we're going to move it back to individual cities running a large proportion of it, so we'll see.
I think there's room for a combination. I will not stand here and tell you that the status quo is sustainable, because I do not believe it is. I think we have a great opportunity to be part of something much bigger here and revamp this entire system. But we've got to have our foot in the door.
That's kind of something that I've been pondering as well, is I think that ultimately what we will see in Volusia County at some point, for the good of the entire county, is moving to what almost everybody else, the overwhelming majority of the state of Florida, has already done, which is fire-based transport.
Correct.
There's a reason why they've done it. It's more effective, it's more efficient, save more lives. There's all kinds of great reasons why you will want to do that. The model we are using in Volusia County is antiquated. And at some point, when that transition has to be made, are we better off having had transitioned that slowly in municipalities like Port Orange and New Smyrna and Edgewater, getting their foot in the door, being part of the process, having a voice at the table, being part of the solutions, and ease those transitions over time. I don't know what the county's perspective is. I kind of tend to look, and you see what's going on around the rest of the state over the last 15, 20 years. It just seems like we're way behind the time for the model and the methodology that clearly is working. Because I would have to concede, Chief, that I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I'm not going to say that Volusia County's got the best model, and all the other counties along the east coast of Florida are doing it
I
wrong.
know of no others emulating
Yeah, right.
what we're
That
doing
being
here.
that being said, my point is that into Bob's question, you know, Bob's right. There's a lot of band-aids. I don't disagree, Bob, 100%. By the way, my thing is that we got to start moving forward. We got to start moving forward in the interest of public safety. And if you look at the models and you look at what's going on, and you truly get away from the skewed data and all that stuff, and truly with the fundamentals of what's happening on the street, it's broken. It needs to be fixed. And we've got to start moving in that direction in the interest of our residents. And you know, I get what you're saying, Bob. You know, the consolidation thing, I got to be honest with you. When we did our own dispatch internally, I always thought it was better.
It was better.
I always thought it was better from my perspective. And what do? We started off with a consolidation of 3 cities, and eventually we went completely consolidated for the entire county, and we lost a lot of efficiencies and effectiveness. And it is what it is today, but consolidation is not always better.
So
Maybe some cases
Not
it may
always
be.
better.
Yeah,
There's
there's a couple things I think have changed, and obviously I'm not from here, but it seems like Volusia County is getting less rural than you all were 10 or 12 years ago,
Yeah.
which adds a little bit to that. The cities are growing in size and in numbers, and the other point to bring out is in my previous career I went through 5 or 6 consolidations in an effort to save money, and it did, but where I came from we failed to execute, and that's a non-starter. So we ended up decentralizing and going back. So people can be held accountable at the local level, and I think at least that's kind of the conversations you and I
And
have
just
been
for the
having.
record, I'm not making a knock on the county dispatch center. They do their job the best they know they can do, and with the setup that they
what they
have.
have. It's a
I'm
tremendous
just
job.
speaking in retrospect of what I was part of for many, many years. I personally felt that, you know, having it within our own city was just more effective and efficient for us. And I think that, you know, the other thing to keep in mind is we're a city of 61 or 63,000 residents now.
Depending.
We're not a small city. We are a city of good moderate size with the ability to best serve our residents ourselves. And we do that in many other ways, even though there are supplement services of the same kind that are provided by the county. So it's just something to keep in mind.
The other problem, and again, I think the debate between you and I is, I am probably I am more on the fiscally conservative side, and I have real concerns. We have a small police department that needs resources. Fire department can eat them all up itself. Police department can eat up what we have. Take a look at the basic underlying finances of Port Orange. You're going to see they're not impressive. The east side is poor. People have trouble just meeting their taxes, and it's going to get worse now. Everything in life is balance, and what we're trying to do here is provide the best quality services we can at an affordable price, and that's what we're looking at. I do resent that the county is, in my opinion, or it appears, gradually sloughing off some of its costs on the city, and that makes it hard. For example, I want to pay a living wage to our police officers and firemen, our existing staff. As I add more and more services, it makes it more difficult. The theme I find is hire good people, pay them top, and expect well of them. Well, it gets really hard to do it as you increase the number of employees against a tax base that is not very resilient. And that's where we are today. We've got a tax base that we got to keep an eye on. Next year we got some real problems coming, and I don't want to be hiring people and then laying people off. I like easy landings. So next year we're going to have real dilemmas, and this year we're talking about increases that next year are going to be even more expensive for us in a year that we know we're going to have to meet some real challenges provided by the state and the like. So as we move through this, you know, I'd love to have a golden everything, top of the line. Just can't afford it here. We are not a wealthy city. And just take a look. We don't have the high rises along the river, which pay huge money. We don't have our situation a lot better than it was a few years ago because of the pavilion and other businesses. But it is difficult. And we do also have a lot of Save Our Homes, which cuts our ability to raise taxes. So we are revenue challenged. Take a look. Anything we do in the general fund immediately leads to a significant increase on the taxes. And you know, and I am not ashamed to say that one of my goals is not only to provide good services, but to keep those services at a cost that most of our residents can afford, that all our residents can afford if possible. So that's my concern.
Let's get back to talking about what we're talking about here in what we need to do in fire. Help me out just for the sake of conversation. Number of structure fires we fought last year versus the number of medical calls. And I know,
Off
rough
the top of my head,
guesstimate. I'll take a guesstimate.
I think we had 61 working structure fires. And medical calls probably were somewhere between 6,500 and 7,500, and that's an absolute guess.
And I know that certainly a structure fire is labor intensive, but I just want to face reality. You're medical and fire.
Like
if we
all other,
want to take a
like
look at
all
what
other
our mission
firefighters
is.
in the United States, you're correct, sir.
Yeah. This is what we do. Forget what you call yourselves. This is what we do. This is what our citizens.
We are the Swiss knife of public safety.
Dang right.
Daniel Boone.
Daniel,
We
Boone
should be
reference?
happy that we're not fighting more structure fires, because it is.
Fire inspections are a good thing to fire suppression, and
Yep.
we're seeing the fruits of labor from having an aggressive code enforcement program and a fire inspection program.
If we build them better and inspect them right, we should have less fires.
We are.
Theoretically, you're correct. Anything else?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, I got something. Our goal up here, our number one goal, as councilman, we stated it, is public safety. So for me, this is not about revenue at all. This is about public safety and getting our folks, our citizens, people that live, work, and play here, the best pre-hospital care, and get them to the hospital the quickest that we can. And quite frankly, waiting 25% or 30 or 50 or 60% longer for that ALS unit to arrive is unacceptable. We need to do it here with our folks, let them do it, and get them back in service as quickly as we can until we get that second unit and that third unit, or however we're going to do that. The only way to prevent downtime at a hospital is to have a second unit. So we're not there yet. We're doing the crawl, walk, run thing, and if we don't do it, we're never going to get there. And the goal number one of public safety, this is all about the patient that calls 911 that needs us. We can get there quicker, we can provide the care, and we can take that patient to the hospital. We just got to step up and do it.
With that in mind, I've got a ton of questions, but the biggest one I have is, if I add an ambulance and the county deploys their ambulances further away, how is this still a service enhancement?
That's a great question, and Jake and I discussed that today. Because as soon as we drop that patient off, we're going to be right back posted at Station 73. When EVAC drops their patient off, they're going to go to wherever the system status dispatcher tells them to, or where the Marvelous program recommends they go. Our posting location is going to be Station 73. That gives us the largest single advantage.
Then how does, when you're answering a call, or there are two calls in the city? I've seen two ambulances in our city, so I know they station them that way, but we would only have one.
To begin with.
And to begin with, it ain't cheap either.
Crawl, walk,
It's got to
crawl,
be
walk, run.
Yeah, and it's got to be a service enhancement. And this is the other thing I'm struggling with, and you and I have talked about this before. If we're answering so many medical calls, why do we need, I think you probably have an argument for adding an additional firefighter or two anyway, but why do we need additional firefighters just for an ambulance? Why wouldn't we just, okay, 73 has a fire truck and we have an ambulance. Get a medical call, you answer in the ambulance. You get a fire call, you answer in the fire truck.
We call that cross-staffing, and nearly everybody in the industry recommends against it. It's prone to mistakes. You oftentimes will forget or leave one piece of equipment when you're transitioning from one piece of equipment to the other. We did it here briefly back in the day when we had a rescue unit, and it was very, very disastrous. So I highly recommend against it. On top of that, our call volume is much different than all of our neighbors.
If we add additional ambulances, would we house them all at 73, or would we
No.
put them in different houses?
No, we'd strategically locate them. I think the best spots to put them would be 71, 73, and then have one on the west side, either 74 or 75.
And if you add additional ambulances, would you be doing the same thing, adding additional firefighters, or would we get into firemen go to fires and ambulance people go to ambulance, or the call comes in and they take the appropriate unit?
No, we would not cross staff. We would staff a fire truck and the ambulance, and we always have an obligation to go to fires. And there's this ISO rating that's important. You can't vacate a fire truck. and put them all over in the ambulance, because then you lose that credit for fire protection. That's a road you really don't want to go down.
I'm not, that kind of led me to my next question. Why wouldn't you just staff a house with an ambulance and man the ambulance and then man the other fire stations accordingly?
Because the people in the perimeter or in the area of that fire station would lose their fire rating. ISO has the ability to reduce your fire rating if you vacate geographical areas of your city. So if you close the fire truck and just man it with an ambulance, it's going to have an overall effect on your ISO rating. Conversely, by having cross-trained firefighter paramedics on fire trucks and ambulances, you have a very good chance of reducing your ISO score further, because you can use that staffing on the ambulance for staffing on the fires.
Okay. Setting ISO score aside for a while. I have a long list. Setting ISO score aside for a while. If I'm adding, for every ambulance that we add, we're talking about adding people.
Potentially.
And if we're adding people and they're answering medical calls, it seems like the fire crews would have less to do.
Sometimes, but oftentimes you're still going to send 2 companies to those medical calls. We're not getting any less busy.
And it also seems if we add ambulances, we're also adding to the amount of money it's going to cost. We're adding to our losses every year.
Or you're adding to your revenue.
Okay.
And Mayor, let's not forget, an evac ambulance, an ambulance can't extricate. If you have that vehicle accident with entrapment, you're gonna need the crews
I
coming
understand.
with the
I was
tools.
gonna
That-
mention that. We
and
talk
that's
a
a
lot
very good
about
point.
fires, but it's more than fires
Yeah,
that
it's a lot
our
more
guys
than
go
fires.
to.
Chief, when Edgewater started theirs, I was under the impression they did not, they didn't hire any more staff to do it.
We
They
looked
just
into
built
that, and in 2001, when they added their first rescue, they hired. And I think they added their second rescue in 2008 or 9, and they hired. So we did research that, and they staffed up when they hired, when they started their rescue units, their ambulance service, they did staff up. Correct.
It just seems that, and I'm trying to get my arms around it here. If we're answering the same number of medical calls, we're just answering it with more people, the more ambulances that we add.
Correct.
And that's why we look to the crawl, walk, run. We would only really look at adding a second ambulance if the call volume and the revenue stream supported it.
Because to be honest with you, if we're crawling and walking and running might not be year 1, year 2, year 3.
I understand that. But we had to present you with a plan, and that's our initial plan.
Jake, this one's for you. I'm sorry. I know you're over there with Alan and having fun.
Yeah.
With Captain PowerPoint there. If we do this, wouldn't the city have to carry additional liability insurance? Would there be an additional
I
cost
think
there?
it's covered.
I
through-
believe we've already looked into that, and
That's in those cost numbers.
It's already
Okay.
in there.
There you go.
Already
So
done.
that's a yes.
Yes.
But it's already in there.
That's a yes, but we factored it in. Okay.
Of course he did.
It was in the PowerPoint. Shouldn't have it. If we're running ambulances 12 hours, why are we staffing it with additional 24-hour employees?
because you can't hire half a body, and that's a good question. If we add 1 person per shift, we have to hire 3 people to add 1 person per shift. We have to fill the other seat on that ambulance with either a person on overtime or existing staffing if we're not in an overtime situation. And so what we gave you with the overtime was a worst case exposure.
I know that this is a year 1 scenario,
Correct.
but moving forward, wouldn't we, if we're running 12-hour ambulances, wouldn't we want 12-hour crews?
We could consider that, but you want to maintain these people as dual certified members.
Oh, I get that. That's fine.
And the
It's
dual
just-
certified schedule is 24 on, 48 off.
But if they're running ambulances 12 hours, what are they doing the other 12 hours? From 8 p.m. to 8 a.m.
Riding the fire engine.
when we get fewer calls. So we'd staff the fire engines with more people from 8P to 8A when we get fewer calls because we're not running the ambulance.
Or you send the people on overtime home.
Home.
But here's the. A bit
I
of
told
a-
you, I'm trying to get my arms
I know,
around this.
I know. And here's a bit of a quid pro quo that I've tried to, we estimated the overtime as a worst case scenario.
Mhm.
So we've estimated paying 12 hours of overtime Monday through Friday. On the PM side of that shift, from 8 PM to 8 AM, that person that we hire will then be moved out onto either a fire engine or a ladder company. That in effect will reduce any overtime exposure on the PM side of the shift. Now we really didn't give that into our estimates. We didn't calculate that into our estimates, but that will reduce our historical overtime
For half a day.
for half
During
a
the
day.
week.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It is amazing. Here's the issue. I've basically been satisfied with what the fire department's doing. You know, the last couple of years, they've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
We're now going to basically significantly increase the cost on something I'm already satisfied. And it's going to make this city, going to bring a very heavy financial burden on the city. At what point do you stop and decide that and this is for the whole council,
Mhm.
at what point do you decide, I have so many other wants and desires, how much do I put in to be satisficing rather than making me absolutely satisfied? And that's the issue. The cost, we're now,
You do whatever it takes.
what, 8 people responding to an injury?
It depends on the nature of the injury, the nature of the call.
Okay, that's, I mean,
And we're not sending 8. We typically would send a 3-man engine or ladder company, and we would get 2 people on the ambulance. So on a typical call, you're gonna get 5 people.
5 people.
On a fire call, the NFPA standard says we send 14. We have to send the entire city, and we're still not gonna meet that standard on working fires.
Okay, but I'm talking about an injury or a minor car crash or any of that. What would we be sending?
The closest units,
Okay, so
5.
that would be 5?
typically 5.
Because we staff our engines with 4, right?
No, sir, 3.
5, 3?
3.
3, and then we will send, the 2 would be from
Yeah,
evac replacement.
that's correct.
Chief, can you walk, I'm sorry, Bob,
And
you done with that one?
Yeah.
Can you walk me through what the mayor was talking about there? Because that kind of got lost there, how this plays out in terms of real application and scheduling. So if we buy an ambulance, we're looking to add 4 personnel.
The ambulance personnel only would require 3.
Would require
We're looking at adding a 4th person in the event that we take one person off the line who's currently on the line to assist with fire inspections.
Yeah.
Our fire inspection bureau is critically backed up
Okay.
because of the number of plan reviews he's doing,
That's
all
where
the
I
new
was-
development that's
yeah.
going on. I've got to get our fire marshal some help.
I got it.
So
That's
the
where I was
fourth- that's
confused.
the fourth.
with
That's where the 4th body
Okay,
would be to backfill the guy that comes off shift.
thanks.
If we were not adding an ambulance, how many people would you be requesting?
I would still like 4.
Good man.
Here's the bottom line. We're a growing city. We're still 6 or 8 staff positions lower than we were 10 years ago, and we have added 1 more fire station. We have that fine balance of having 15 as the minimum staffing on each shift. To man 5 fire engines requires 3 person per engine. That's 15. We currently have 17 assigned when we're fully staffed. The collective bargaining agreement allows 2 of those people to be off on any given day on annual leave. So on any given day, we're already at minimum staffing. So if anybody's off on workman's comp, if anybody's off on military leave, on bereavement leave, on anything,
What they
then
call
we're
it
clicking
sick?
off the overtime.
People get sick.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit below that sweet spot of optimum staffing.
So our staffing level is say that again, it's 9 less than it was 10 years ago?
Yep, I believe 8.
8
I
less than
believe.
it was 10
Yeah.
years ago?
You're that much smarter than they were 10 years ago?
No.
Yes,
They're
yes
doing-
they are.
They're doing
Good
far,
answer.
no, they're
Yes, they
doing
are.
far more with less.
So
Too many of them in
They're
the
doing
room.
far
That-
more
that
with
more-
less.
Say anything.
They're
got
that
rid-
much
they got
more
rid of you
efficient,
for
they're
that,
that much
so
better.
They got, yeah.
They're a ton better than they were when you were around, is that what we're saying, Drew?
If you wanna put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, I tell you what, gentlemen, we've been sitting still for almost 2 hours. We have this and the rest of it to go. Let's take a short 7-minute break and let's return and find a way to put a bow on this. My head is spinning. We are 6 minutes and 58 seconds away from getting back to this. We're
Mike is
back.
at home, so I'm used to that call.
Hate to say that, but I think that was the best 7 minutes of my day.
You don't need 15.
That's a sad state.
It is a sad statement. The biggest element of this is, for me, is certainly the fire component, but we've got the entire a la carte to take a look at. Jake and I met. I have some suggestions.
Mayor, do you want us to pull it up before you do that?
Yeah, I would like for you to do that if you've got it.
Trace.
And even these I'm hedging on. Because I have serious heartburn with a 14% increase no matter what we do.
Thank you for your patience. Tracy Ream, Finance Director again. Here's the a la carte model that we have been looking at before. I'm pleased to approach it however you like. Top down, or do we want to?
Top down, if you don't mind. The ADA transition plan we're stuck with. However, that does create a $200,000 creation in next year's budget.
Mayor, I just want to make sure, we're not stuck with it. But failure to do it would
Cost us more than.
cost us a lot of grant opportunities, so just.
So in other words, we're stuck with it.
Okay, thank you. Approved, got it.
There are a number of reasons why we need to be ADA compliant, much less
Absolutely.
to keep our attorneys out from defending ourselves every week. And I think the biggest example we've seen of that county-wide is what happened with our bus stops. Because somebody got sue happy with the ADA, our bus stops are actually less handicap friendly than they used to be. Because, and that's a shame. Certainly that's another topic, but I think that the legal aspect of that justifies that. My suggestion, Jake and I were talking about as we go on, instead of adding 3 officers, talked about adding 1, but what I'd like to do is maybe go ahead and add 2 and start them both half the year in, knowing that the vehicle and equipment expenses are one-time expenditures. That's not necessarily a can kick when you do it that way, because that would be there to cover their full salaries next year. I have the crime analyst and the evidence supervisor, as we adjusted those before. We adjusted the evidence supervisor to a technician. I have no problem with those. The unmarked police lieutenant's car reclassification.
Hang on, Mayor, if I can, just to interrupt, just ask a question for clarification.
Go ahead.
When you're looking at 3 officers and you're bringing this number down to 2, this also includes the base budget, which has 1, so a total of 3, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. So we would be, and that's what we were looking at is going from +1 to +4 with what we were talking about before. And these are just my suggestions, guys. We can kick them around, but let me go ahead and get through it.
Well, as you go through it, should we kind of say yay or nay on it then, so we don't have to
Make some,
individually bring up?
make
You're
some
gonna
notes.
go back anyhow, right?
We'll make some notes and come back to it. I'm just
Okay.
throwing this out here, because quite frankly, the way everything's split, I seemed like I was the deciding vote on everything anyway.
You're
so.
gonna make the decision.
Oh, geez. Is that what you put me here for?
We don't wanna call you double-digit Don.
No, we don't. And thus the cutting the way it is. If you could go ahead and keep scrolling.
This section, there was fire, can't quite get it on, can't quite get this on just one page, so let me. So we were down here to the firefighters.
We got the firefighters. When we got down there, the fully equipped apparatus, the 75,000, we were talking about that coming out of, that was the additional 75,000 for the, I'm sorry, for the $1 million quint.
Yes, the $75,000, we had 900,000 in the lease and replacement fund, and we had an additional 75,000 that was eligible for fire impact fee because it was an expansion
Right.
of service.
So, and I think we were all good with letting that come out of impact fees.
Right, that's why here at the top, you don't see it here. However, the revised cost estimate does show that we would have a bit of fleet financing that would hit by adding that. So when we went back
Right.
through and rebalanced all of the funds, which you've received, this document you received have all funds in it, that was an increase there.
Of course, I will admit to having some sleepless nights and waking up in the middle of one of them sleeplessly thinking, man, that fire truck could buy me 2 or 3 ambulances. But I won't go backwards here. 1 firefighter instead of 4. Leaving out the ambulance for now and the overtime that goes with it. And this is where I was about a week and a half ago when I met with Jake. Go ahead and scan down. Market compression concerns, we need to do that study in preparation because we've got 2 union contracts opening and we need to be ready and be prepared for that. I had no problem with that, except that I felt like
It's not enough.
I felt like that's an awful lot for a study that I'm not sure that we couldn't have done in at least a portion of in-house.
It's not a study.
It's not a study.
No, those, I'm sorry, that's wages.
We're doing a study, but it's not, that $75,000 and some of the money from this year as well will be used to continue to address our market compression concerns.
And forgive my
we are not
bleary
paying-
eyes as I'm comparing notes here.
We are not paying anybody to do a
Gotcha,
compression study.
gotcha. Administrative services IT, I left that alone. And I think I pretty much left everything else alone. The biggest changes, I think, were the biggest cost biters, fire and police. I still feel like we need to add to both, whether we add an ambulance service or not, but I'd like to do that in a little bit more of an incremental basis. Now, your thoughts on both those guys, both those things, gentlemen? Let's start with police. Adding 2 officers.
My issue, which I've been very clear since the beginning, I asked for a standalone budget, and all these items are outside of that standalone budget. I'm just not willing to go to the tax increase that this is gonna require.
Okay.
That's, you know, I wanna be consistent. I think the standalone budget was what?
Wait, why
How
are we
much was
changing
that?
that?
Above rollback
We didn't
was
vote to
about
change it.
7%, the stand pat budget wasn't about 7%. The budget without these a la carte items.
Yeah.
Well, when we prepared that, there was about $250,000 for council to allocate. So just want to point that out at the time, our initial discussion back on 712.
How much is that in above rollback?
One moment, please. I don't know if it's above rollback, but.
You can zero
Before-
everything.
We
you can
brought
zero
in the
everything
initial
out here.
budget, we brought in the initial budget at the same millage rate as we currently have, of
Well, I don't,
4.4881.
I don't want the same millage rate. I
Okay.
want to know what the above, I want to know how much we're increasing our taxes above last year.
6.65%.
6.65%.
Yeah.
And that's with allowing us to allocate about $250,000 towards these things here, and however we see fit.
So,
So Mayor, I've put in 2 police officers. The part that I wasn't clear on was whether these are full year funding, I
Mhm.
believe. So I heard you at one point say starting the midway, and then I'm not sure where we are, or what you're asking me to do.
What I'm thinking is that we had 2 officers instead of 3, but we, when I was thinking midway, I was actually thinking January, so you're talking three quarters of a year?
Yeah, so.
So 1.5 officers instead of 3
Okay,
on the salaries. The vehicles still stay at a whole number,
right, the vehicles.
2 vehicles instead of 3.
Yes, sir.
And
Okay,
then everything
now-
else on the police side stays the same.
Okay,
You've spent 200 of the 250,000 we allocated just on ADA, so really we had 50,000 for everything else. And
Right.
then beyond that is an addition.
okay.
I had 1 line firefighter.
Go up. Mayor, one of the things that was talked about, and I don't recall having this conversation with you, that if we decrease the level of firefighters, that we would reconsider that inspector. Did you include that deliberation and decide to go to 0? There.
Yeah,
Or did
you
we,
know what,
or did we forget to talk about it?
that was only 2.5 weeks ago, and
Right.
seems like a lifetime ago to me. But
Yep.
yeah, we did have that conversation, and I'm good with it, which probably means 2 firefighters instead of 1, which means a net 1 on the line, right? Is that what we're
Correct.
talking about?
Was
We
the
would-
ins-
we
was
would-
the inspector
We
the
would
same price?
we would
Hey,
hire
be nice.
2
Was the
We like our
inspector the same price?
firefighters and pull one of the existing people off the line to be an inspector.
No, I don't have any. I don't have it on this version.
2. If you want a fire inspector, we would pull our guy off the line and make him the inspector and hire 2 new guys.
One guy. So
Just
that's
one.
him.
If you're exiting the ambulance,
Okay,
you still need 1 to take 1 person off the line.
got it. So you're good as
So it is-
stated.
Okay.
You're good
It
as
is
stated.
stated.
No, at 0. You're correct.
Leave
Tracy.
that at 0.
Okay.
We're only adding 1 person.
You're
Okay.
all right.
And then, of course, you take the equipment out
Okay,
and the overtime out.
okay. Let me make that a 0 so that, because otherwise that's gonna bother me.
Right. And where does that leave us,
Okay,
approximately?
now why did these not? That's hard-coded.
Hit
so
F7.
Hang on for a moment, I apologize. Because it calculated all of this,
Mm-hmm.
but this
The new rate, 4.7.
this has not changed down
It's
here.
current rollback,
No.
percent over rollback changed, no,
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 it did not.
did not.
Your numbers upstairs, but your calculations downstairs did not.
Okay, let me see if I can't figure out, we did update this spreadsheet to show all the changes that we'd made, so all of these reductions and pulling out the fire stations
I
and
had-
all this, so I imagine what's happened is in that
And
process, so.
And in my playing with this, and of course I've done subtractions, additions, so I was approximately 4.55 for a millage rate, which was roughly 6.2%. And I don't trust my spreadsheet completely because I got blue screen of death when I was working on it. So I don't know what got saved and what didn't.
Okay, so I'm gonna
Take a
need
deep
to
breath
ask
and get
for a
it.
moment, because
Do
I
it.
need to figure
Take
out
your time.
exactly.
While you're doing those calculations,
No, why my new rate isn't calculating. Spreadsheet's not calculating as it,
Mhm.
as it previously did,
So look at this cell and just fix it.
Mhm,
We got
I
time.
will.
We
So
got
We
time.
got till what,
I
11?
have moved,
Chief, police chief. Can you answer a
So
quick
I've
question
moved
from
it.
the top of your head if you have a second? While we're waiting on Excel
Yeah.
calculation.
I'm sorry.
Timeline from the time a position is made available for your department. What is your realistic time frame in order to make the hire? Backgrounds, applications, interviews, all that stuff. How many weeks is that?
It's kind of that's a difficult question, Councilman, because it's an ongoing process. We just did, I think,
So you're keeping
3
some in the wheel?
interviews this week alone. We're already, Wednesday, so, we've
Okay.
already done 3 interviews this week. So it's a constant process, but if, once we get somebody that gets through the first couple phases, and their background, their physical agility test, polygraph, the psychological, the medical, drug screen, everything that we have to do,
Just rough idea.
couple months
I think
at
she's just
least,
looking at
probably
what
closer
sells.
to,
So if the
closer
mayor-
to 3, and it's dependent sometimes on when we can get into the doctors, the psychologists and the medical.
So if the mayor, what he's talking about is pushing some starting dates back to like January,
January 1.
you would still be able to know that those are being budgeted. You would still be able to be in that process so that come January, you can,
Correct.
Get 'em
So
on board.
knowing that if those are available to me in January, we would start that process now. We would
Gotcha.
continue our recruitment process to get that many more officers now.
And as of-
continue that.
as of today, how many positions do you need to fill that you have currently?
3, we just graduated one from the academy last week.
But that's already committed, right?
He's committed. We did offer to another one, so we have 3 openings, but we do have some, I have 2 right now in background that are very deep in background, and thus far, nothing has come up that is adverse
Okay.
to us. So I'm hoping that soon we'll have one, and that's always that moving target.
Sure.
It almost has to be that ±5, it seems like.
Yeah, I
It's just
understand.
always fluctuating.
So
Okay.
you still have, even with that, you still have a vacancy element to the,
Right, so and that's why we're continuous recruitment, so
Mhm.
we're hoping to get those filled. No, I'm hoping to get those 3 positions filled by the end of the calendar
well,
year.
and I'm gonna sit here and say, I love hearing that, because if I think back to where you were 2 years ago,
At one point, we were 15 officers down, which
Yeah.
is significant for a police department our size. With that being said, we hired more than 15 certainly, because in the midst of that, we had a couple retirements and a couple disability retirements and such. So we lost some to other PDs. So it was 15, and then we were fluctuating back and forth. But we did. Our recruitment team has made great progress with that.
if we add these 2, go ahead and add these 2 to the budget, how many sworn officers will you be allotted?
With these, total will be 3 with the entire
3.
package.
1 plus
Three,
these
that
2.
would put us to 96, I believe. But that includes the command staff too, because we're counting that, but we really, let's be honest,
We count you, you count.
Yeah, thank you.
You are somebody.
I do appreciate that.
I've been meaning to ask about your arrest stats. We'll
But-
talk about that later.
Yeah. Woefully low.
We'll work on that.
But yeah, that includes us to our command staff, so we're not really on the road taking calls, but that is inclusive.
Mhm.
But it'd be a total of 96.
So, okay,
Okay.
so we're pushing them to January.
That's doable.
That's doable.
Even with, of course, with the reduction in that number from what we talked about, it was 3-2 before. Is anybody changing their mind on the yeses and nos as far as the numbers we're talking about?
Absolutely not.
Okay. All right, so basically, from the police side of this, I think we have a consensus of sorts.
No, I'm sticking with the last one, not
You
this
wanna add
one.
3?
I'm sticking with what I voted for the last.
Okay,
I'm
I
not
g- I
changing my
gotcha.
mind.
I got you. You wanna add 3. Scott?
Yeah, I wanna add the 3. I think our public safety is way understaffed. Been that way for a long time.
No,
No to what?
I want to keep, I told you what I was willing to spend, at 5% above rollback.
So, the you're no to adding
Well,
any of these
I don't
officers.
care how we
There's no to
do it,
everything.
I do believe we need more police officers. The problem with this à la carte is I wanna take a look, what am I turning down and what am I taking? My first priority is police officers, yes.
Okay. Then,
But I would, depending upon what we have left, I would like to help the fire department as well, but,
There's nothing,
you
there's
got about,
nothing left.
you
If
got
we fund
$50,000 to spend
If we
on any of
fund
this.
ADA and that's a given, then you have $50,000 left.
my argument is that the ADA, since it's a one-time study, should have been funded by you know, by monies from the rollover account.
We're not using that. We agreed early on not to
I
use
didn't
that.
agree to it, but
Well, you as a Councilman
We
Ford,
agreed
which
to
is
it.
the
Okay.
people I work for. So that's off the table,
Unless we change our minds.
unless
I
you
think,
change your mind.
I think the problem with the fund equity is because, well, let's say 2 hurricanes.
Oh, don't say it. Don't say it.
Zapped our reserves.
you can't do everything.
Unless you guys feel differently about funding the ADA through fund equity. General fund or fund equity?
General.
So, yeah,
I'm okay with funding that through general fund, but I'd
Okay.
rather, if that's gonna be included in our millage, then that 200,000 will be there next year, available for more police officers.
Mm-hmm.
it won't be because
No, it won't.
we'll be $1 million
In the hole.
in the
Figure
hole,
we're 987 in the
Uh,
hole if Amendment 1 passes.
right?
Millage rate wise, but yeah.
So it is a one-time
The big
cost,
tax shift.
but yeah, we're gonna be, that's a good thing, cause next year we won't have that in the budget.
Mhm.
Not saying there will be another $200,000 thing that we are not aware of, but, Trace, how are those manual calculations coming?
Well, as best I can do, there's nothing quite as enjoyable as public math. But that being said, I have the benefit of an Excel spreadsheet, and it's circling around to what I believe it should circle to. So where we were on this one is this was really built to highlight the change, the reduction, or the change that had happened from version 1 to version 2. So here your initial increase was $1,250,000. And then we, through a variety of changes, reduced that to $1,218,000. So that's kind of where this was built. And so you see all these pluses and minuses coming in. You know, we've added and subtracted things.
That
So,
got us to the 4778.
yes, this got us to the 47781. So I just copied it over here, and so basically we've reduced that down now here to 634. So that's really where you are by moving things. If you hadn't had them in to start with, you'd be at the 675. So that change is giving you an additional 0.0411. So you're still, you know, from a rollback perspective, because this rollback is just so incredibly low at 4.2. It's a very low rollback.
And we're not
However,
We're
you're
at
brought
4.5.
down to 5.55.
Go
Or
back to the
4.6.
original one.
But that's 12% over rollback you have there.
Mhm,
Got
as
it.
opposed to 13.54.
13.54
Yes.
over rollback.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not right.
so we went from 1.2 million to 600,000?
So yeah, we've
And that's only
Yeah, that's not right.
that's not right,
There's something wrong
well
there.
a tenth, because a tenth of a
That's
mil
not
should
what I
be
got.
about 300,000. now.
300,000, right?
So
So we should be
we've-
2/10
We should
different.
have pulled 2/10 of a mil off of this. I can run back to my office and work on it for a moment. I apologize for that.
We can't,
Let us go back and work on it, Tracy, on the bigger thing, because
that's not function. That's not.
so
It
go
sh-
to your
we should
original
lose about-
spreadsheet,
2/10 of a mil.
I can-
your original way back when spreadsheet that the
Yeah.
mayor's been working off of.
Yeah,
Um,
I can try to do that. I can pull it up here.
this reminds me of September 19th, 2017.
I'm so sorry. My apologies.
Except for I don't have a headache this time.
Can I access the
But I
ODOT
do.
from here? Probably not. No. Mm-hmm.
Is it your reduction in millage, the column H? 180? 180, that's wrong.
Where are you seeing?
Take your time, Chris. I'll be back.
No, because that is the sum of all of the changes above. This is the change between, that's the change, yeah. It's just designed for a different purpose, so it's not functioning as well. But do I have the old one on here by chance? Maybe.
Bet you do. Go to
I bet I
Excel.
do.
Just go to Excel and open recent. Cell down at the bottom. Open recent. Or that way. Micromanager.
That was from
That's what I'm known as. Or that.
That's not it. Mhm.
Hmm? Yeah.
Oh, is Robin doing that?
Well,
Yeah, now we're in trouble.
That'd be a heck no.
Hey, Robin.
Robin's doing it for me.
Yeah,
Robin, go to Excel,
I'm in a.
file.
I'm working on it, it's not moving.
Don't do
I
it.
knew it wasn't working right.
Yeah.
You
there's
should come
two-
up with approximately
I
4.55,
should
which is
lose-
8.1%
I should lose
over.
2/10 of a mil in that neighborhood. I should lose.
The point 1805 mils takes
This is your original.
5976.
Okay, so if I take the,
This is the one from the 17th of
this
July.
is the one from the 17th.
I tell you what,
So we
Tracy,
can do.
We're here. We're there.
Tracy,
Yes, sir.
have you got it or no?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is the one from the 17th.
So
Mhm.
So with
start
the
changing the
exception,
numbers.
yeah, I just need to switch some figures around. Did any of,
Almost everyone
Did-
changed.
Almost all of
almost
them.
all of them changed.
Plus your fire stations are in there, all your.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so that's not gonna work. Gotta fix this one.
Okay, I tell you what,
You think it's taken off the .1805?
Go ahead, Mayor.
Tell you what,
off
we're
of this.
this is what we're gonna do. We're
Mhm.
gonna give you a chance to swap that out, and while you're doing that, why don't we hear from anybody here who wants to comment on the budget?
That's
Because
exceptionally
we're gonna
kind.
do that anyway.
I appreciate that. That's exceptionally kind of you. I shall return.
Thanks, ladies.
Tracy, do you need that stuff?
No, I've got it back.
Okay.
Are we good to go?
Bring it on.
Yes, sir.
Great. Hi, how y'all doing? My name is John Fleming. Lived in Port Orange my whole life. Here to talk regarding.
The clerk's gonna need you need address for, okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Sorry to
And-
interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. So I've lived in Port Orange my whole life. Just a disclaimer, my inherent or innate bias, I'm a fireman. Not in this city, but for another one. So for anybody that wants to discredit anything I say, that's your golden ticket. But so I'll just do my little spiel and hopefully I beat the clock. So mayor, commissioners, as a lifelong citizen of Port Orange, I was very happy to see that you all were seeking to increase the level of emergency services and evolve out of the antiquated two-tier system currently in place in Volusia County. The fire department is an all-hazard mitigation medical provider who naturally would have a disproportionately higher budget than an ambulance company who only provides one single service. To compare the operating cost is illogical and probably would be done by someone trying to misdirect the audience. As a taxpayer, I really do appreciate it when my money is used efficiently as possible. If the fire department was able to add additional firefighter paramedics in order to increase your organizational capacity for providing ambulance transport, it'd be a smart move and one that the citizens deserve. In doing so, several things would occur. Provides a huge opportunity for the city to recover costs, instantly increases continuity of care for your patients and decrease clinical errors, increases the ability for a higher ISO rating that would influence a reduction in homeowners insurance citywide, relieves Volusia County EMS from perpetually failing to serve the citizens of Port Orange while they're running a hospital interfacility transport business, mitigates emergencies exponentially quicker by having a greater amount of dual certified firefighters on scene more quickly, and improvement of firefighter safety when utilizing the additional staffing on firefighting operations. These are only several positive impact items among many others. Up to this point, I've been massively disappointed in the media's coverage and publishing of letters that fail to acknowledge the complexities and truths of this progressive move by the city. I'm also highly disappointed in the letter that was sent to you by County EMS Union President Jason Laidman. His letter was a true representation of misinformation and misdirection. He'd like you to believe that county EMS is a fine-tuned, efficiently run organization with no gaps and has great cost efficiency. Excuse me. He's made many statements about other fire departments using or stepping out of the PLUS program. Unfortunately, he's not accurate with the reasons provided. If they were so concerned about the citizens and their response times, they'd be supporting Port Orange's efforts to serve the citizens. He went on to compare operating budgets of all the fire departments versus his organization to again lead you to believe.
Motion to allow John to finish.
How much time you need, John?
2 minutes.
It's a workshop.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
carry on.
Cool.
Consensus is, go ahead.
Carry on.
So, yeah, if they were concerned about the citizens and response times, they'd be supporting your efforts to serve the citizens. He went on to compare operating budgets of all the fire departments versus his organization to again lead you to believe they're more efficient. This doesn't make any sense at all because fire departments provide many more services. I'd even venture to say that the fire departments could probably decrease operating costs if they didn't have to use all the city's equipment and drugs on the patients while on scene without any reimbursement while they transport and bill the patient. The two-tier system is a massively inefficient system, especially when it's being run with an interfacility transport business component. Hiring more people for Volusia County EMS will not correct the system's flaws. Given the substantial increase to the safety of our citizens and the firefighters, I fully support the momentary tax increase to cover startup costs until a third-party billing agency can be hired to begin cost recovery and revenue generation. That's it. So, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Sir?
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of research for like the ambulance billing and the market. They're capping at 6%. So the 10%, they're raking you over the coals. So.
You know. Thank you.
Thanks.
Who else? Debbie, Sarah? Come on.
Come on.
Yeah, you all.
Anybody?
This is a little on the challenging side. I've never come to one of these meetings before.
That's
Well, then
okay.
welcome.
We're glad to have you.
My name is Dalen Mills, D-A-L-E-N, for anybody who cares. And I live at 134 Brandy Hills Drive. I've been a part-time resident of Port Orange for 17 years. I'm a Maine native, and I won't speak down east to you at all. So I drive an ambulance, volunteer in my hometown in Southwest Harbor, Maine. Have for 3 years, and I've been intimately involved in that. It's an all-volunteer, not-for-profit business. And a lot of the things that I've heard here, in a much smaller scale with 2 ambulances and paramedics and intermediates and basics sometimes that have to cover us, it's similar in some ways. One of the things that concerns me, Councilman Ford, when you were talking about infrastructure and a lot of the information going on within the county, that makes a lot of sense to me that be done, and that before the city gets into having another ambulance with fire and safety, maybe it should be tabled for a year or tabled for a time to further get the county involved. It's my understanding that if we do go with an ambulance, that we could get calls to Ormond Beach, or we could get calls to any place in the county. And as such, right now, we can just go to the residence or whatever that happens to be, and do whatever you have to do to be able to transport. I mean, I've been here 17 years and I've never figured out why you can't transport. That just makes no sense.
County won't
But
allow us.
I know that it's a legal thing on that end of it. But I'm not for or against adding adding another ambulance to the service. But I think that what I'm hearing here is that, and I've heard a lot of information. It's the first time I've ever been to one of these things, and it's very rewarding listening to you guys. And the thing that I really got from the meeting is there's more information needs to be brought in, you know, and before you make a decision to add to it. And I think the fire department does a wonderful job, and everybody has said that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me echo that. Of all our concerns, I think if we did transport, I think we all agree that the service we provide would that in itself is an enhancement. Hello, Sarah.
Sarah Jones, 44 Woodfield Drive. Two things. Number one, I think because it is a matter of life and death, that you don't wait for all the available information, because you never get to the point where there's all the available information. At some point in time, you have to jump off the edge of the swimming pool and jump into the water, and that's what you have to do. And this talking about we need more education or more knowledge is simply a sort of a way to delay the decision. And then the knowledge that I think the average voter wants is, what will it do to my tax bill? And what you have not answered, and which I think you should answer, is take several assessments, like my home that's $119,000, another home that's $250,000, maybe a home that's $400,000, and you say, you figure how much will that tax bill change if this goes through? And that will answer the question for the citizens of whether or not they want it. And I think they'll find out what Councilman Bastian said several weeks ago, is it really isn't going to be that much money for the individual taxpayer. I don't know the answer to that, but that's the question you should be answering. And then after that, you should vote to go ahead and give this ambulance service a try. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think the answer to that's about 12%.
So, Mayor, I didn't
Yeah.
collude with Sarah. We do go to the same church, but rough figures, a $270,000 house will have a $88 increase for.
How much?
So hear me out. 88 for fire, 88 total, 22 of which would be parsed out for fire, if you will.
So as it relates to the fire department, that home would have a approximately $22.
The fire department, it costs them $22
increase.
$150,000 house, $48 would go. Their tax would increase $48, and $12 would go to pay for fire. That's including. That's all inclusive, including the transport, because the transport's currently in the budget that I.
So in that scenario,
Chief actually
the 150 is $48 and change a
rough
year.
order of magnitude.
And what did you say? $12 for the
12
14?
bucks.
Okay, $12 for the fire
Thank you.
department.
Yeah.
I think that's
Fortuitous.
Yeah.
Good question. The other point that kind of brings up is the ways you pay for these things. We've got about my 3
Mayor,
minutes
you're
is
done.
up already. Yeah, as much as you'd like to do that. The fire fee can only be paid for fire expenses.
Fire
but we're-
assessment can
fire-
only be.
We're
for-
not there, guys.
for-
We shouldn't
and
be
that's
discussing
part
that.
of it.
Not for transport.
But there's some swinging around. I'm just thinking, there are 1,200 homes that will not pay taxes at
That's
all.
the system we have.
And if that number is gonna go up, I don't know. No matter what we do, because of all the exemptions and all the different values, somebody gets hurt, somebody makes out. And that's just simply by doing one thing. Somebody gets hurt, somebody makes out.
The people who rent homes are gonna be hurt badly.
Yes, they will.
And anyone in business is gonna be hurt badly. People who have saved our homes will not be hurt as badly, although the tax increase will go straight through. Because Save Our Homes only protects you on the assessment increases, not on the tax increases. So and the assessment increases this year have been significant too, so it's gonna be all over the board. So when you talk about how much the average person is gonna pay, good luck, because some people are gonna get whacked pretty heavy. If you just bought a house, I was just talking to a lady who was in shock because I think the person she bought the house for, their total tax bill was $602, and hers is now
Not
pretty
that
close to
anymore.
2,000.
Yeah.
So, we have the most convoluted, unfair tax system you could ever think up.
No, California's is worse.
Okay.
But pretty close.
So,
Thank goodness for California.
so, you know, when someone asks me how much is it gonna cost me, I say, you know, I gotta bring in a tax accountant to figure it out.
Well, as far as the ambulance, I would like to do it, and I'm committed to doing it at some point in time. I personally don't feel we're quite there yet. I mean, there are a lot of things that we talked about tonight. The collection rate, I got answered, negotiating. I still would like to negotiate a better billing rate with the county or have it outsourced because those are dollars that go back to that. I still feel like we could add an ambulance to a fire station. They answer with a fire with the ambulance, and of course they're on scene anyway. So instead of waiting for an ambulance, they transport. We're already more efficient simply by doing that. But then we go to the hospital with the non-medicals. I don't know which hospital we're going to. We need to go to Halifax, Port Orange. We need to have those protocols in place. That's something that we need to discuss with the county. Because if we can't, we're sending them out of town a long ways away to wait a long time for the non-medicals.
No matter what the vote is, Mr. Mayor, and I think you're going in the same direction as I am, no matter what the vote is on this, we really need to seriously put together a committee from the council to continue the pressure on the county to begin to develop protocols. It's been going on far too long. Let's get it settled once and all for all. Let's see what we can do to change the county's approach to make it more effective and more easily utilized. There's a ton that needs to be done. The way we dispatch is really needs to be worked on.
We can't control that.
Well, no, but we can politically influence it, and that's what I'm saying. We really need to be going down there, meeting with them. We need to have staff working with them. Let's see no matter which way we go, there's a lot of things we need to do.
We used to have our own dispatch, then it went to RCC, and then it went away.
And it turned out to be a disaster.
Yep.
And we all knew it would be, and it was said right off the podium when it went away.
Well, we were told we could keep it, but we just wouldn't be able to use the numbers 911 to have anybody reach it. So it kind of forced our hand.
Well, it also meant double taxation. That our taxes were paying for a 911 center we wouldn't be using, and they're pushing the same thing now with the ambulance.
Well, some of the things that
we all
need.
pay a millage rate to the county for just being in the county. So
we pay a millage rate for the ambulance. Their ambulances.
And we pay for roads too. You might not ever drive on a lot of the roads. We pay for our own roads, and for the county. So you can't really. I mean, I don't think that's a valid argument in my opinion because you don't drive on all the roads in the county, but you're paying for them.
Between wait times, I need to see a Halifax Port Orange protocol written into it somehow.
Yeah.
I need to see closest unit response because I have no problem with mutual aid. I think mutual aid, we benefit from it and our neighbors benefit from it. Your neighbor's house is on fire, you go help your neighbor. And that, I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. But most of my neighbors are the contiguous cities. I have no problem helping some of our non-contiguous neighbors in an extreme circumstance, but we put an ambulance in a rotation. It's got to be closest unit response protocol so that we make that an exceptional situation.
That's what they're doing right now, if I'm not mistaken, correct, Chief? They're doing closest unit response right now.
I don't know. I'm confused.
I was told differently at the county when I visited the dispatch center.
They're doing it.
No, that's not true. They've been doing it.
They've been doing it.
The dynamic the dynamic model, Majestic, whatever they call it.
Marvelous.
Marvelous, thank you, Majestic, Marvelous. I was told it does not necessarily account for closest unit.
It's a dynamic deployment system, and Marvelous are two separate things you're thinking about. Dynamic deployment is a methodology in how they do their scheduling and where they stage their ambulances. The system that figures out statistically where the most likely next call is going to be is the Marvelous system. But I can assure you of this, that there was a meeting today of the Volusia County Fire Chief's designee, Chief Drew Driscoll from Daytona Beach and Chief Jim Bland. I talked to those gentlemen today. They met with Manager Forte and Manager Barlow, I believe.
Tracy.
And I believe John Zaragoza, the head of EVAC, was there. And the PLUS system, as we know it, is going away, and it's going to be called the CARE system. And that's going to be the closest company concept, which is what you asked me to do last year.
Right.
And we've got it done this year.
And that corresponds with what I've been hearing.
So,
I think
Staff,
I think
do you guys want to go stand behind Tracy? See if we can speed her along.
That'll help.
Mayor, I think the discussion about what hospital they ultimately transport to is valid, but I would just offer that the first step in the process is we got to get in the game. You know, we're not in the process. We're not part of being part of the solution, and we're not invested in it to where I think this thing's going to go into the future. That being said, getting the ALS transport unit on scene quicker, regardless of what hospital they end up going to, ultimately should be our priority now. I think what you're talking about with what's going on and the turnover times and things like that, I think there's some complexities there. I definitely think there are issues. There's no question about that. And we need to be able to work on that. I would offer that if we are transporting, we are going to have much more firsthand direct knowledge and experience to continue that discussion and continue improving the overall process, which I believe will absolutely benefit our residents. There's no question.
We could have a say in the game
I'm not
then.
any doubt of that at all.
Right now, we're one of the outliers because we're not doing it, and so they're not going to listen to us.
Being in the game with the county, sometimes I'm not sure that you always have a say in the game just because you're in the game.
Well, we definitely don't have a say now. So.
In regards to the
that is
protocols,
true.
In regards to the receiving hospital, that's dictated by medical protocol. If it's a cardiac alert, a STEMI alert, a stroke alert, a traumatic alert, those are going to go to the hospital, Halifax, Daytona Beach, by virtue of the nature of the injury or illness that is already set out in medical protocol.
Because they're a level 2 trauma center there.
That's correct. I think Joe said most of our transports go to Port Orange, Halifax, or to Port Orange, or I'm sorry, Daytona Beach. So the majority of the transports out of Port Orange go to Halifax and Daytona Beach. But again, it's driven by the nature of the call and the medical need of the patient being transported, and that's all written out in the county medical director's protocol.
Just offer that the Port Orange Halifax is a stroke receiving facility, so stroke alerts go there now also. The only thing that has to go up to Halifax is.
I got to have you on the record. That was more than 10 words.
Yeah. Okay.
Come on up.
That's all good. You're better protocol than I am.
My name is Chris Taylor. I'm the vice president of the union. So I've been in the field here for since '98. So I got a good idea of the understanding. But what I was saying back there when you're talking about the hospital, Halifax and Port Orange is a stroke receiving facility now. So the ones that have to go up to Halifax and Daytona is a trauma alert. Not all trauma calls, just when the injury is so significant that they need trauma care, surgery or potential surgery, that's the ones that go up there. Also for cardiac or heart attacks, which is a stimulant, those have to go up there too. But when you look at the total volume of calls, those 3 instances are not the majority of the calls that we run. Right? We're running a lot of diabetic calls, falls, broken hips, stuff like that, that all can go into the Port Orange Hospital.
Cardiac was only 461.
Right, not, and just because you
TIA was 139, so that's 139 calls that would stay in the city that didn't before. Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, Tracy, where are you?
Alan, we check on the police?
What did you say, 5-minute recess?
Yeah, 5-minute recess.
Where's the pizza?
We're back.
Now I'd like to thank council for your graciousness in allowing me to retreat.
That was the 5 minutes.
Thank you. Allowing me to retreat and take a look at
Started a few seconds early.
at the calculations. So with, just going back over what I understood, and again, you're seeing a little bit difference because you're seeing some of the things that are in the back. We've got 1 ADA transition plan, 1.5 police officers, 2 vehicles for the officers, an evidence supervisor, a crime analyst.
Actually, an evidence technician.
Evidence technician, yes.
Uh-huh.
It has the same name, changed to an evidence technician last time we met. A crime analyst. We have 1 additional firefighter. We have some market compression money. We have the GIS technician, and that's what's in here now. So we have reduced where we were by 584,000. That's almost 2 mils. So you're now looking at a mill of 4.5864, and that calculates into over rollback of 8.98. Over including debt of only 1.52 and a percent overcurrent of 2.19. Down here is assessed value, and so the impact on the homeowner, assuming a $150,000 home with a $50,000 exemption.
So they go from $449 to $480.
What?
I'm
No,
sorry,
they go-
458 to 487. One
No.
above it.
No.
They go from 448 to 458, which is a $9.83 increase
Annual.
annually.
That's
Current
millage,
and- okay.
millage, not overall, right?
Those
Because
are
the
dollar
debt,
signs.
the debt takes a hit too.
Yeah, well, here's where we were with the debt. So this is
Mm-hmm.
including the debt. So a $9 increase. If that's the home. I mean, just as a data point, one data
Okay.
point.
So it's percent over rollback is 8.98.
Correct.
But that 8.98% equals $9?
On an average home.
Okay.
Because it's
Taxable 100,000, 150.
right. It's only a, when you include the debt, it's only a 1.52% increase. So if you, so say 1.5%, you've got a current cost of 448, so 1.5% over that. So
No, it's an increase of 8.98.
I'm trying to get to the dollar value on the home.
We keep on, every year we have this conversation about rollback versus tax increase to the taxpayer. They're two different,
No, they're not.
they,
I was trying to,
correct?
yes, I was trying to see the
they-
$9 increase to see the value, you know,
The
why that was
$9
coming up.
increase is not the same as the rollback percentage.
That's correct, because it's
Not
not,
even close.
the rollback is a almost 9% increase, and a $9 increase on 440 is certainly not, so.
There's something wrong because all the rollback is a very simple number. How much you collected last year and how much you collected this year, and the difference between the two. So explain how it would be that. If it would be 9%, how would it get to $9?
The rollback rate is the same amount, you're correct, it is given the increase in your assessed value, how much would you have to charge to raise the same amount of revenue as you raised last year?
Correct.
Okay, so when that is the 9.89 that you're talking about, because the increase here that we're talking is up in that 600 and, well, no, can't make that comparison because we're at $1.9 million that we're raising. So now we've reduced that by 584, so we're looking at raising $1.3 million. So that's the 9% that you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, but so it just depends. When you talk about a tax increase,
We're
is it the
increasing
amount of
our-
cash someone's paying out?
We're
or is it
increasing
this?
our revenue by that much.
We're increasing our
We are
revenue by
not
that.
taxing the people by that much.
That's correct. We
On
are
average.
increasing the revenue by that.
On
much.
average.
Mhm.
That the
Which-
money's coming from the people, so, I mean, let's be frank, if we are increasing our revenue by that much, it's coming out of the people. Rollback is the amount that we raised last year, and
And no more.
minus then also not including in the amount of new revenues. New revenues are exempt from it, so if you get rollback, you get additional revenues that were generated in this year's taxes. So the problem is, if the rollback is 8.9 was it?
Yes, it was
Okay.
just under 9.
Okay, so it's still a 8.9% increase, and 450, 8.9% of 450 is what?
It's
about
about
$40,
$1,300,000.
40-something dollars.
You were back to the house
Yeah.
example. I'm sorry, I'm
Right.
at the global level.
Okay,
Because
so-
here, this is where we started this evening at a 1.9. So we've pulled 580 out of this.
Okay, we
So
did some good work there reducing.
that's correct. So you are correct. We are still raising about $1,300,000, $1,400,000 out of this, which makes sense because when you're talking about 12 and you're going to raise $1,300,000, you're hovering right around that 9% mark. So you're correct. Additional revenue would be raised out of the ad valorem taxes in this proposed scenario.
Okay, that's all. Make it clear.
So that puts us at 8.98% of a rollback without ambulance.
Correct.
So
which is a
and I'm going to assume your spreadsheet is working right now. So if you put in the unit and the overtime again, what's the difference?
So we're going to put in 3 here. I'm going to make this 4 again.
No.
Yes.
No. I'm asking a question on the
I'm
unit
sorry,
and the
but I'm
overtime first.
misunderstanding you.
That's all right. I'm going to take it a step at a time here.
Okay.
The equipment is 1. No, 1 divided. Okay. 1 there.
You want to see where we are?
Yeah.
9.59.
So we're at 10% before we find a way to staff it.
So keep in mind, as we go through this, that at the beginning of the workshops, we kind of all joked and laughed about not budgeting to millage, because I asked you what millage rate you wanted at the beginning of that. I said, just give me the millage rate and I'll budget to it. So,
And we gave you that.
so next year, if this is what we're gonna do, just give me whatever rate you guys are happy with and I'll budget to it. It's much easier. Because that's what we're doing right now. But go ahead.
Tracy, can you put the well, the mayor's thing? Can you put the staffing in for the ambulance so I can get what that bottom number is actual for what it would actually cost?
$12.2%.
So then, if I understand that correctly, if in those two scenarios, if we for a homeowner with an assessed value of $150,000, if we do not do the ambulance and the staffing, they realize a dollar amount increase of about $9 a year.
Correct.
If we do the ambulance and staffing, they realize an increase of about $23.72
So it costs
a year.
$14 to provide it.
And if council is interested, we can change the assessed value and the homestead exemption so you can see other scenarios.
Isn't 150 typically the number that's used? That's what I
Yeah,
always see in the
that's
papers.
That's what
It
they
is.
use. What I
It is. That's why I chose it as well. It's a
Yeah.
commonly used
And
figure.
then Debbie in the back shaking her head because she knows the median home price is a lot higher than that.
Yes, which.
Was it about 229 now?
Yeah, they're at 239 right now in Port Orange.
In Port Orange.
For assessed value? Okay.
239.
That's the
You
market.
can buy some houses at
Now-
150, I'll buy them all.
Well, then that's
Well,
not the assessed value, that's
yeah,
the.
assessed value is different than.
Assessed value is
They're
different.
pretty close now, they're getting pretty close.
Well, the assessed value is what the market was on January 1st of this year. So you're but you're not that far off either.
So if you put in assessed, they're looking at,
Assessed would be 80% of the sale price.
Correct.
okay.
So you would,
So I can make that 80% of this.
Say about 196. 190, okay, 191 too.
Mhm.
Then that's more realistic. That's the average homeowner would probably pay about $33 more. Okay. I'm not happy with a double-digit increase. I'll be honest with you. I'm happy for the 1,200 homes in Port Orange that won't have an increase because they don't pay anything now. Lucky them, but that also gets shifted off on everybody else too. Okay. Tracy, read through what we've got there on the chart.
At this 12.28?
I'm
or
sorry,
back-
no, go up, what we have included.
In the 12.28, you have the 4 firefighters and equipped transport unit and some additional overtime. The market compression concerns, the GIS technician, the crime analyst, evidence supervisor. Actually, the 2 vehicles for the officers, 2 officers starting in January, so an equivalent of an officer and a half, and the transition plan.
Okay, Chief, got 2 questions for you. My multi-page list here is down to 2.
2 pages?
No.
2
Well, you see how, yeah, there are 2 pages of questions, and you see how small the font was.
Got it.
Is there any opportunity to hire these guys and girls with SAFER grants at all?
Not now.
In about 2 years, possibly.
Okay.
But the grant period is long past. We, this body, not you individually, but this body, this city was given a SAFER grant, and this body rejected it. I know of no other cities who have been awarded a SAFER grant a second time after it was rejected.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're not out there. I just know of, I don't know of any. We shot
It was
ourselves
8 or
in the
9
foot
years
when
ago,
we
and-
rejected a SAFER grant.
Yep. Okay. And secondly, if I told you that I give you 2 of the 4 firefighters, can you make the ambulance program work for a year?
You gotta have 3.
Here's the fallout. We don't have enough staff our head count is not high enough now to sustain our existing services. The only way I can do it in your scenario and run it with the hours that we're talking in a crawl, walk, run scenario, I'm gonna have to force people to work overtime. If I force people to work overtime, our program is doomed, and I will not do that to my members.
Okay.
We have to give him the tools that he's asking for to do the job correctly.
It would not be the first time we've asked a department head to find a way to make something happen and be more efficient, and make do. That's something that we've done in Port Orange in all our departments for years and years and years and years.
Doesn't make it right, though.
More often than not, yes, it does, because we've gotten results.
Here's
more often than not.
I'll
sit here and say that Drew's right, because there have been times we've done that where we've cut way too close to the bone, and some of the things we've done the last couple of years is paying the price for it.
As opposed to 4, we could do 3, but I'll tell you the fallout of that. I have one member, one of our senior members, doesn't want to ride a rig anymore. He's seen and done enough. He's too proud to go to the doctor for PTSD. I've got to get him off a rig.
But he'd do a terrific job inspecting.
Exactly. But I got to backfill his position, or I got to raise the overtime. It's that happy, or the sweet spot of staffing.
Okay. At the beginning of the night, I wasn't in. At the beginning of the night, I wanted to do it, but I didn't think we were there. I still don't think we're there, but I am in.
Thank you.
But you gotta close that gap for me. You gotta look for some other efficiencies, cause what I've given your department by saying yes is a whole lot more than I've given probably to everybody else combined. So, and I'm not saying that the need is any less or more. We are talking about people's lives. But I want you to know where I'm coming from. I've always been straight with you, and I'm not gonna change now.
And I appreciate that. And also, I think that hopefully we will see some historic overtime savings by adding one fresh body per shift. And that calculation really isn't in any of our expenses, so we'll do everything we can. We can't predict workman's comp injuries. We can't predict long-term illnesses. And some of the people that we had off this year, we've been carrying on payroll one member for nearly a year on workman's comp. We had another one off for 4 months. We had one guy on sick leave for 5 months. Those are some circumstances, because our head count is so low, those are circumstances that drive up our overtime.
Okay. Then let me ask my council, as I have proposed this. I've got a feeling that you guys are exactly where you were before, because you're consistent, right?
Correct.
Okay. Hey, I have no problem with that.
I would wish it success. Truly do. I have the same position, but I do want it to succeed. And I have no doubt that our fire people will be able to do it.
The other thing that I'd like us to do is take the medium income projections that we talked about earlier this evening, because this does not include any income projections. I'd like us.
We'll get those. I'll make sure I know what you're talking about, the 21% or the.
No, not the bottom one, not the top one, that middle number.
We'll see if we can.
I don't feel good about that, because we're talking about just starting up. It takes them a couple of months or more to just begin.
Yeah, I don't want.
Yeah, don't count on the revenue.
And to your point, what I want to do is take what you think you're going to get per month, and the first 3 months of that is zeros, and then figure what that is, and then come back with this. Because you're right, we're not.
I got a guy with a calculator. Figure that out.
Oh, and I'm okay with
Use your
being
guy.
conservative
Alan?
on that. I mean, I think that's the responsible thing to do.
Okay.
Not in public.
Gentlemen?
I guess there's just it just comes down to respectful, fundamental differences of how we approach the budget. It's okay. It's good. It's what the process is. I had hoped that what we would approach the budget at collectively is our needs, not an arbitrary number. And I like to look at the needs. Yes, ultimately the cost is totally a factor. I agree 1,000%. But
it's always going to be need versus cost.
But we set our goals and objectives for their city and the quality of life. We put public safety consistently 5-0 across the board every single year. We are behind in our public safety. We haven't kept pace with growth and demand. There's no questions about that. You know, a fire department that's 8, 9 members lower now than it was 10 years with the growth that we've seen over 10 years that we know is coming down the road. That's unrealistic. That's not sustainable. That model is not there. And you're right. Some years we've cut very close to the bone. I think you look at other cities and the numbers that have been provided for us, even with this increase, this still keeps us deep in the bottom third of what other cities and residents around the county pay for services and don't get, quite honestly and proudly, they don't get the level that we get in Port Orange. And that's a good thing, you know. I'm not looking for Port Orange to be average by any stretch of the imagination. I don't believe folks in the city of Port Orange live in Port Orange to be average. I think they're looking for a little bit of a higher level quality. Now, where that level is, I'm sure that is going to differ because it differs on the council. It's going to differ in the streets. I get that. I respect that completely. No question. But I do think that the decisions we're making, and I get that the big dollar tickets here all are public safety, as they probably should be. And the city's growing, times are changing. I think with regard to this ambulance issue, I think this is going to be an evolving thing. I believe this will be a good first step. I think Bob and Chase on the other side of the issue raised great comments that need to be continued to be pursued, and we need to continue to evolve this. And someday, quite honestly, I believe we will evolve this collectively as a county into fire-based transport. That's where this is going to go. And I like easing into that. I can't even imagine what that scenario would look like to flip that switch all in 1 year, 16 cities across the board. I can't imagine what that would look like. But I do think that getting involved, us having an ambulance in our city to better benefit our residents, and also giving us a voice at the table, a better voice at the table for all the other issues that I think we're talking about. You know, you mentioned the non-emergency transports. Look around our own city at the rate that we're building ALFs, right? Look, the baby boomers are going to live a long time.
We got to have.
But yeah, that's right. But they're going to be living in facilities that are going to be relying on non-emergency transport services that currently put a huge strain on our evac system right now. And I don't know that the county fully recognizes and realizes the magnitude of the issue. I'm a little disheartened, quite honestly, to hear that what's actually in the budget is 2 BLS units. In my opinion, that doesn't put a scratch in what is really needed. You know, 2 BLS, fine, but there should be another 4 ALS in there as well. And I think that speaks volumes. You know, the numbers, it's so difficult to make heads and tails out of all that. But what we know is that when our residents make that call, there's an expectation that we get there quickly, and we provide a good quality service. And I think it's a right step in the right direction. It's a crawl. It's not the answer, but I believe it will help. It will also put us in a position where our neighboring cities, New Smyrna, South Daytona, Ponce Inlet, Edgewater, you know, they've taken that step as well responsibly. And I think that I feel better too being part of that regional solution. But I agree. I think there's a lot of work to be done. There's no doubt about that.
So it begins. I've watched this scenario in the Northeast. The Northeast is slowly going bankrupt. Just talking to people up in New Jersey. They're all amazed how well this area runs, how good our roads are, and how good our taxes are. Well, they're not going to be very good. Remember, these double-digit increases compound each year, and next year we start at an even higher level. We have now had 2 7% increases, I believe. Yep. And now this will be, what, a 13, 14% increase? What are we talking about?
12 something. Less after we put in revenue, but yeah.
Questionable revenue. But it begins, and gradually we will drive out of Port Orange the poorer people, the people that are on fixed income. We don't mean to do that, but under the guise of everything has to be perfect and we have to hire more and more and grow government, we will gradually make a mess of it, and it's a shame. We have a really nice city here. With our spending in control, we have provided a wonderful place to come to, and all of a sudden it's not good enough, and we have to begin gradually to move to double-digit increases in spending. We were doing fine. Most of the people in the community, if you look at our rate of acceptance, are absolutely happy with what they are receiving from the city at a very reasonable price. But I'm just saying to everyone, this will not go over well. These type of large increases will not go over well, because again, next year it's going to be even worse, because we have major problems coming because of the state action. And also, we're crawling right now. It's going to be more expensive to walk. So put on your seat belts. Here comes the costs. And it's going to affect our sales for realtors, because the more your taxes go up, the harder it is to sell homes. One of the things people love about this area is its low tax environment. Certainly, we need to be moderate, you know, and if we're not moderate, we will destroy paradise.
Drew?
Well, and kind of not really in response to that, but my take on that, even with the increase and providing the ambulance service and the other things that we're doing across the city, our millage rate is still going to be on the bottom 3 or 4 cities. So if you move to our surrounding neighbors, Holly Hill, South Daytona, and buy the same house,
New Smyrna.
it's still going to cost you more to move there than you're paying here. So I mean, I don't get the rationale that we're going to run people out of town by doing that. I don't think that'll happen. I was supportive of, and I'll stand behind that. When we set the max millage rate, we set a millage rate and asked the city manager to build a budget based on that. We had a kind of embarrassing scenario last year, going back and forth and doing all that. And quite frankly, I'll keep it short. I supported the max millage rate, and that's still what I support today.
Okay.
I'm not interested in reducing services. I'm interested in giving our department heads and our public safety and the things that they reasonably asked for, which were not outrageous or outlandish in any way, and give them the tools to do their job the way that they see fit.
Chase, final comments?
Yeah, I appreciated all the comments today, and Scott said it well. You know, a lot of disagreements up here, but from a respectful angle. Even as last year when it was contentious, always done respectfully, and I always appreciate that. We have different philosophical approaches. This one hurts. You know, I think I speak for a lot of folks in Port Orange. I'm a paycheck to paycheck guy. I don't have enough money to buy my own house. I rent. I'm going to get crushed as a renter. That's not a homesteaded house. And that is the consistent comment that I hear from residents. I know, you know, we all hear different residents from different comments from folks where we're okay with increased services, we're okay with increased millages. I don't hear that. And, you know, my colleagues admirably are the voice of the residents that they hear from. And I appreciate that. I'm the voice of the residents that I hear from that says, don't raise my taxes. Stop adding services. I'm not asking for it. Port Orange is awesome the way it is. That's what I hear. And that's how I feel as a resident, as a you know, born and raised here. So I come with that approach. And I wasn't at the approach of going to rollback. I'm okay with moderate increases that need to be done. I'll remind that I voted to increase our stormwater fees. I'm not immune to voting to raise fees and raise rates as needed. I just come from a different approach. I think this is far too high. But you know, I'm not going to spend my time trying to convince anybody otherwise. That's my position though.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor.
With that, I'm going to assume that we're going to proceed as I've suggested. And seeing as I've been the swing vote pretty much since this started several months ago, I will say this, I am also going to ask you if there's anything that you guys can do that comes up, that you can sharpen your pencils in the meantime. Those things count, they really do. I think the biggest, most contentious part of this is, I think these are all policy decisions, and they belong with this council. They're hard ones. This one, I think, in particular, was because we're looking at a new program that we've never done, never executed before, and it came with a very, very hefty price tag. And forgive me, Chief, that's why I had 200 questions. It's that vital that we start it, and when we start it, we gotta get it right. We gotta get it right, and the things that we don't get right, don't anticipate, we've gotta fix, because everything builds off of that.
Mayor, can I add one more comment, please?
You got a dollar?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, I don't. No.
I'm looking at your trim notice, you're not that bad, but go
No,
ahead.
I do want to express the compliments to Jake and to staff, frankly. I mean, you know, it's not easy to say no to requests, particularly from professionals that know what they need. You know, and I don't think that we had, you know, inappropriate requests. I don't want to put off that nature, or that thought process in anyone's head that I'm just a no guy, I want to say no. That's not easy to do that. I want to say yes to everything, frankly. But I do want to compliment our staff. I do want to compliment everybody on, I know that they have the job to do, and they want to do it the best of their ability, and they present what they need to do it. So, you know, my compliments there.
Anything else anybody would like to add, or?
Mayor, quickly before you snap again, are you gonna talk?
No, I just wanted to add, and I was gonna add to what Chase said, because I had a notation here along the lines. Last night was a very, very late night for us, and I know, just like me, I've worked all day, staff's worked all day. We worked all night last night, staff worked all night tonight. Same thing today. We've worked all day and we're working into the evening. We're all tired, we're all punchy, but the bottom line is we're here to do good work on behalf of the citizens, no matter what our opinion is about what that might be. So I do want to thank all of y'all.
What is the, I'm still uncertain, what is the increase?
So
It's
I'll-
gonna be 12.2 minus whatever our
Just
revenue
bring it back
projections
up,
are.
just hit it. So, what we'll do, am I assuming that the
So it'll be a
29?
double-digit increase.
Yep.
So 12.28% over rollback. The rate is at 4.7253.
Minus our revenue projections, which aren't
It'll-
in there yet.
It'll come down when we add the revenue for the ambulance.
Correct.
Yes, and
I'm just going on record, I'm not in favor of adding the revenue from the ambulance. Just gotta.
I would agree with you. It's jumpy to do that.
I think you gotta add
Add
something.
something.
That's not realistic to do nothing.
Gotta add something.
well, so
Lowest
we'll,
number.
Be cautious.
I think I was fine with the median. If you wanna do the low numbers,
Do the low numbers.
do the low numbers in
but
9
to
months.
Start off, yes.
Jake, we'll talk about that, what
Yeah.
that can look like.
and whatever council's pleasure is, we'll add that. Can I safely assume that we're currently not gonna meet on the 29th unless staff comes up with something horrendously different than what we've talked about tonight?
Or terrifically good.
Or, well, horrendously different, bad or good, but.
No, you're
right
not allowed
now-
to come up with anything bad. We've already,
We've done the
I'm not happy with this.
Stuff happens. So what we'll do is, September 5th, we'll come up with a first reading at 4 point something, 7253 minus,
4.4.
minus a, revenue projection, to be determined, but the consensus I heard was conservative.
Correct.
Anywhere from nothing to not 50.
that's what that
So, so we'll go ahead and do that, and we can massage that a little bit at first reading, if we need to, but please not at second. We good?
I'm good.
Good night.
Good night.